What happens to a light that no longer wishes to serve its source? What happens to a song that once belonged to heaven, but now trembles with the sound of its own name? There was a time, before the earth, before man, before even the whisper of dust, when the heavens were filled with a radiance that never waned. It was a realm woven not with stars, but with obedience. Every sound, every motion, every breath existed only to reflect the eternal. In that realm, among rivers of light and the echoes of divine decree, one being shone brighter than all others. His name was not yet cursed. It was a name of music, of beauty, of flame and purpose. Iblīs, the one known among angels as the morning star. He was not made of clay, but of fire, a fire unburning, alive with remembrance. And in his chest burned the first spark of will. When the command of the Lord coursed through the heavens, he was the first to bow, the first to sing, the first to rise again when the divine word completed its circle. There was no pride then, only light reflecting light. But within that light a shadow stirred. The throne stood in silence, a silence that carried both awe and fear. The angels knew not rest nor desire, only the endless rhythm of worship. Yet Iblīs began to wonder, what is worship if not recognition? What is recognition if not identity? And what is identity if not the echo of self? When the Eternal announced, "I am placing upon the earth a vicegerent," the heavens trembled with sound. Countless wings shuddered beneath the command, for this was a mystery none had foreseen. From the soil of an infant world, from clay mixed with spirit, the first of men would rise, Adam. It was then that the crack within the light deepened. The angels bowed, and Iblīs did not. His fire raged unseen beneath the stillness. He could not kneel to what he saw as lesser dust, molded by the hand that once shaped him. "I am made of fire," he whispered, his voice trembling between reverence and defiance, "and he of clay. How should fire bow to dust?" But this was not pride alone, it was sorrow disguised as defiance. For within him something ancient stirred, the yearning to be chosen again, to be the mirror of perfection, to be nearest to the one whose silence now seemed so far away. The heavens grew dim. The throne spoke not with words, but with decree, eternal, unchanging. And when the command fell, the morning star began to fade. From that moment, the music of the heavens faltered. The once flawless rhythm of obedience now carried a hollow note, the sound of loss. Angels who had sung beside Iblīs now turned their gaze away. For to look upon him was to remember that even light can fall. He wandered through the void that lay beyond the first circle of heaven, his wings no longer radiant but clothed in shadow. The rivers of light he once bathed in now recoiled, as if to guard their purity from the stain of question. Yet even as he fell, he could still hear it, the faint echo of the divine voice within him. It did not scold, it did not curse, it simply withdrew, and that withdrawal was worse than fire. In that silence, Iblīs understood heaven was not a place, it was proximity. To be cast out was not to be sent away, but to be made distant from the source. Every heartbeat, every flicker of flame within him cried for the nearness he had lost. But his pride bound him. His grief became his crown. His loneliness became his kingdom. Beneath him the earth waited. Above him the heavens mourned. Between them he became the bridge no one wished to cross. The stars dimmed as if they, too, bore witness to the sorrow of one who had seen the face of the Eternal and turned away. The first rebellion had no army, no blade, no sound, only silence, heavy and unbroken. And from that silence history began. For even now the wind carries a whisper faint as breath, cold as memory. I did not refuse his existence. I refused his order. If you are still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. There are silences that heal and silences that wound. The silence that followed Iblīs' refusal was not the stillness of peace, but the echo of distance. It stretched across the heavens like a shadow too deep to cross. The other angels did not speak of it, they dared not. For even in the realm of light, remembrance of disobedience is like touching flame. He stood at the edge of the unseen world, watching the first man breathe. The clay vessel rose, trembling with the wind of divine breath. Adam's eyes opened not to rebellion but to wonder. In them was something Iblīs had never seen, innocence that did not question its own reflection. The angels circled, their wings heavy with awe, and Iblīs watched, unblinking, as light touched flesh and called it sacred. Once he too had been sacred. The word of command. Came a single decree that would test eternity itself. Bow, not to clay but to what the Creator had placed within it. To the soul, the breath, the divine spark that now rested in a form made of earth. He could not. The fire within him rebelled against the thought. How can what is pure kneel to what will decay? He whispered into the trembling air. How can flame yield to dust? His words were not spoken in arrogance alone. They were the lament of one who could not understand love that chooses the lowly. But the decree was not to be debated. It was divine, not democratic. And when the rest bowed, their wings folding like petals before dawn, Iblīs stood alone, tall, radiant, defiant, trembling beneath the gaze of the throne. There was no thunder in that moment, no blaze of wrath, only quiet. Quiet that tore the fabric of heaven. From that quiet came the first command of exile. "Leave it," said the voice that moves the stars. "For there is no place near my mercy for one who denies my command." And Iblīs knew then that he had not merely disobeyed, he had separated himself from the rhythm of creation. He fell, but falling was not swift. It was slow, like a dream collapsing into wakefulness. The light that once crowned him began to fade, replaced by the cold fire of sorrow. His wings lost their brilliance but not their form. He descended through layers of unseen worlds, realms of wind, flame, and darkness, until he reached the threshold of the earth he had refused to honor. It was there, in the breath between realms, that he spoke again. "Grant me respite," he said, "until the day they rise from their graves." And the voice, the same that had cast him down, replied, "You are granted respite." That was mercy, even for the fallen. But mercy without repentance becomes fuel for pride. And so he vowed, "By the might you have given me, I will lead them astray. I will whisper to them from within their hearts until they forget from whose breath they were made." Thus began the first covenant of rebellion, not against existence, but against remembrance. The heavens did not mourn aloud, but every light dimmed in reverent sorrow. The angels who once sang beside him whispered verses of warning, for they had seen what happens when love turns away from its source. And the earth, still young, shuddered beneath the first shadow of his presence. The jinn watched him from afar, for he was of their kind, yet unlike them, refined fire turned restless. They feared him, for his anger burned not at them but at the void within himself. His name, once a song, became a scar upon the wind. The morning star became the fallen flame. Yet even in exile he listened. Every wind carried whispers of the one he had lost. Every dawn reminded him of what he once reflected. And in that sorrow he found strength, the strength to corrupt beauty, to twist light until it resembled his own reflection. He learned the art of inversion, to make truth sound like rebellion, and rebellion sound like freedom. He whispered to hearts not to destroy them, but to make them share his loneliness. For in the secret depths of his flame, he still longed for the gaze of the one who had turned away. His curse was not fire, it was memory. As the ages turned and Adam's children filled the earth, he walked among their shadows unseen, patient, mourning in hatred, hating in love. His whispers became stories, his stories became faiths, his faiths became wars. And somewhere beyond all sound, the throne remained silent, watching the story unfold that began with a single refusal. Heaven does not rush to punish. It allows time to reveal what hearts conceal. And so the fallen one walks still, not as ruler but as reminder. That pride is not the roar of defiance. It is the softest whisper, "I know better." The fire within him has never died. It only changed its light. The heavens grew dim, and yet they did not weep. For how can perfection mourn? But if the stars could feel, they would have trembled that night when one of their own kind, a being of flame and remembrance, fell into silence deeper than the void itself. The fall was not of distance but of direction, from nearness to remoteness, from intimacy to exile. From you to I, he fell not with screams but with the sound of worship unraveling. Every note that once sang of unity now echoed dissonance. Every spark that had once been praise became smoke. The heavens did not chase him, nor did they close, they remained open, for even rejection cannot reach the edges of mercy. But mercy without surrender becomes torment. He struck the unseen ground, not of earth, not of fire, but of despair. It was not death that met him, but awareness. For death cannot touch one made of flame, but consciousness can burn more deeply. He rose from his fall, wings in ruin, eyes reflecting no light but his own. His beauty did not vanish, it hardened. What was once radiant became terrible. His face still shone, but with the glow of isolation. He looked upward. The throne still gleamed far beyond sight, a brilliance so pure that even the memory of it ached. And for the first time since eternity began, Iblīs felt something only mortals would later know: longing. He could not climb back. The decree was final. But he could linger between realms, near the edges of men's hearts, where faith flickered like a candle in the wind. And there he built his dominion, not of armies, but of whispers. He learned the sound of sleep. He learned the language of hesitation. He became the still voice that speaks when the heart is tired, never shouting, never commanding, only suggesting. For the path to ruin rarely begins with war. It begins with a thought that seems harmless. He whispered to Adam and his companion in the garden, his voice a melody of half-truths. He did not tell them to defy. He told them to remember themselves. Would he forbid you from what would make you eternal? Would he deny you what would make you like him? He spoke not of rebellion, but of reason. And they listened not out of arrogance, but curiosity. The same curiosity that once burned in him, now mirrored in clay. When they fell, the wind sighed through the leaves, and the fire that had envied clay saw them taste the same exile he bore. For a moment, Iblīs was not triumphant, he was understood. The garden closed, and humanity entered the long night of remembering and forgetting. The fallen angel stood in the shadows of that gate and whispered to himself, "I am not alone anymore." The centuries that followed were not marked by his victories, but by his patience. He moved through the hearts of kings and slaves alike, through poets and prophets, through every being who ever asked, "Why me?" He did not invent sin, he merely reintroduced pride to creation, as if offering an old mirror to a new face. Yet even as his fire spread, it dimmed. For pride, when prolonged, becomes sorrow. He began to miss the very light he sought to deny. There are tales spoken in the dreams of saints that sometimes, when the world sleeps and the stars turn silent, his flame flickers with remorse, not for his rebellion, but for what he lost because of it. The nearness of the one whose silence still defines his eternity, and the throne remains unmoved. For God is not diminished by defiance. The rebellion of light only proves that even perfection, when distanced from the source, becomes shadow. There are nights when the jinn remember his name with reverence, and others when they whisper it in fear. Among them he reigns, not as king, but as exile crowned by echoes. The flames that follow him do not warm, they remind. His kingdom is vast, yet empty, filled with those who love too much their own reflection. And so the story of the fall is not just his, it is ours. Every act of pride is a small echo of that first refusal. Every moment of humility, a small return toward the light. For the fire that once refused to bow still burns within creation, but the command remains unchanged. Bow to what was breathed by the divine. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the silence, beyond the stars that never sleep, there waits a mercy too deep for even the fallen to escape. A mercy that watches still in quiet compassion, because even the morning star, though fallen, still remembers the dawn. What remains of light once it is separated from its source? Does it die? Or does it wander, seeking the flame that first gave it form? There are realms unseen by the eyes of men, places not of space, but of remembrance. Between heaven and the world of clay lies a vast silence, where prayers float like dust motes caught in eternal dawn. It is there that Iblīs stood after the fall, no longer among the radiant choirs, yet not fully bound to the earth he despised. His wings, once woven with the threads of praise, were now draped in the smoke of exile. The echoes of heaven still clung to him like a memory that refused to fade. He looked upward. The throne was distant, veiled in the same brilliance that once crowned his brow. He had stood close to it once, closer than most angels would ever dare. He had felt the pulse of divine will, had heard the unspoken name that moves the universe. And now that same silence stretched between them like an endless sea. There was no fire like his. It had been pure, created from smokeless flame, alive with purpose. Now it burned without reason, feeding upon itself, devouring the memory of its own holiness. The angels above whispered of him only in silence, for his name had become the shadow of their obedience. They did not hate him. They pitied him. But pity is colder than wrath. He walked upon the unseen plane that borders light and darkness, where time moves not in moments but in sighs. There he spoke not to others but to the silence itself. Why, he asked the void, was I made to know beauty if I was never to keep it? The question lingered, unanswered, for a turn. It does not explain itself. The Creator had already decreed the order of existence, the rising and setting of light, the weaving of souls, the measure of trial and mercy. Yet within that order the fallen one found his purpose anew. If he could not reign beside the throne, he would reign among the hearts that beat far from it. He would take the smallest spark of pride, that same ember that once burned in him, and breathe upon it until it became a flame. It began with whispers. Not shouts, not commands, for rebellion does not begin in storms but in seeds. He whispered to angels of lower rank, to jinn who wandered near the veil, to shadows that sought meaning in the reflection of light. Why should you serve without being seen? He asked. Why should you love without being loved back? They listened, not because they believed, but because the question felt familiar. And that is how pride begins, not with denial of truth, but with hunger for recognition. He crafted his kingdom from longing, a court of echoes, where those who could not bear silence gathered. No throne of gold stood there, no banners, no crown, only the remnants of light that had fallen with him. And though they bowed, it was not in worship, but in exhaustion. For those who follow the fallen do not seek power, they seek justification. Iblīs sat among them, not as ruler, but as reminder, the first to fall, the first to question, the first to weep without tears. Around him, the ashes of his former glory rose and fell with each breath he took. They clung to his skin, dimly glowing, as though the heavens still tried to remember what he once was. And above, the throne remained unmoved, untouched by defiance, unshaken by sorrow. For the Lord of all worlds needs no vengeance, he only reveals. Every rebellion in its end becomes revelation. But there was one thing the fallen did not expect, the return of mercy. It did not come for him, but it came for mankind, the clay he despised. The voice that once cast him out now called to Adam and Eve, "Descend upon the earth, but fear not, for guidance shall come to you." That single promise shattered Iblīs' heart anew. For he understood then the mercy he rejected was given to those who disobeyed after him. His rebellion was of pride, theirs was of remorse. And repentance, he realized, was a gate he could no longer enter. He turned away, covering his flame in his own shadow. And in that darkness the first tears of fire were born. They say the sands of time still hold them, molten traces buried beneath mountains, glowing faintly at night. And when a wandering soul feels the ache of separation too deeply, it is said the fallen flame stirs again, whispering softly, "You and I are not so different." But he is wrong, for man was made to fall and rise again. The morning star fell once and never rose. Still he waits in the space between repentance and pride, where no prayer echoes and no angel sings. There, among the ashes near the throne, the first exile watches creation unfold, aching not for power, but for the nearness he traded away. and the universe continues its song, unchanged. There are nights when the heavens are so still that even angels seem to hold their breath. Those are the nights when the memory of the fall drifts again through creation, when light recalls the one who once wore it like a crown. Iblīs walked the boundary between worlds, where the unseen winds hum with the voices of those who have prayed and perished. The earth beneath him was not soil, but the residue of what once was holy, ash and light intertwined, the remnants of a war fought without swords. Every step he took left no trace, for fire does not mark what it passes through. Yet in the echo of his movement the air remembered. The angels above continued their ceaseless praise, circling the throne with obedience that shimmered like rivers of dawn. But Iblīs no longer looked upward. The sight of their devotion wounded him more deeply than the curse itself, for he knew their joy came not from knowledge, but from nearness, something he would never taste again. So he turned his gaze downward, toward the realm of dust and struggle, where the children of Adam began to awaken. He watched them, fragile, fearful, luminous in ignorance. Their souls flickered like stars half buried in the dark, unsure of their own light. He felt something within him stir, not hatred yet, not fully. It was recognition. They were as he had been, created to serve, yet given the burden of choice. And choice, he knew, was both gift and weapon. He approached the first of them in whispers, not to destroy, but to understand. He circled them unseen, learning the texture of their hearts. He saw how they wept when alone, how they prayed when desperate, how they forgot when comfort returned. It fascinated him, for though he had been cast down for pride, they would stumble for love, hunger, fear, and be forgiven. That was the wound that never healed. Do you love them more than me? He once asked the silence. Even after they betray you 1,000 times, will you still call them yours? The silence answered not with sound, but with a whisper through the wind. I am nearer to them than their own veins. It was then he understood. His punishment was not distance. It was witness. He was to watch, endlessly, the dance of divine mercy upon those who fall and rise again. His fire, immortal and restless, would endure through their ages, tempting, whispering, waiting, not only to mislead them but to test their remembrance. For even rebellion in the hand of the Eternal becomes part of the design. In that realization he built his temple not of stone but of shadow. Its walls were the doubts of men, its pillars the echoes of unspoken fears. He needed no throne, for his dominion was not space but thought. His palace was the mind, his servants the whispers that slip between breaths, and in this unseen realm he ruled with patience more terrible than wrath. He whispered first to kings, to those whose hands grasped crowns heavy with blood. He told them that they were chosen, that their power was divine. He whispered to the priests that their wisdom was their own. He whispered to the poet that his words were eternal. And each time a heart believed, the shadow grew thicker, until nations bowed not to heaven but to their own reflections. Yet in his dominion there was no joy. For every time he saw a soul stray, it was like watching a candle flicker and fade, another spark lost to the same darkness that had consumed him. He became not only the deceiver, but the mourner of those he deceived. There are ancient traditions that say, on the night of decree Laylat al-Qadr, when the gates of heaven open and mercy floods the world, even he pauses his whispering. He cannot bear the sound of forgiveness. It burns more deeply than fire. The angels descend, carrying light through the dark, and he hides within the folds of the earth, covering his flame with ashes that once belonged to heaven. And as the first light of dawn breaks, he whispers again, softer this time, almost tenderly, you will forget. You always do. But among the believers there are those who remember him differently. They do not curse him, they pity him. They know that his existence is proof that God's justice is perfect, that even the most radiant of beings can fall when the heart chooses pride over surrender. And in their prayers they sometimes whisper, protect us from his whispers and from the fire within us that mirrors his. For every human carries a spark of that same fire, the will that questions, the ego that hungers, the pride that says I am. But unlike him, they can bow again. And that is what he cannot stand. That is why he watches still, his gaze as cold as the space between stars. There between heaven's glow and earth's sigh, he lingers not to rule, but to remind. That even light, when it forgets humility, becomes the shadow it fears. Night after night, he walks unseen through the spaces where prayers fade and thoughts remain. Where tongues fall silent, but hearts still tremble, there he listens. And though his name is cursed upon the lips of men, it is not hatred that binds him to their world, it is memory. For once he too had worshipped. Once he too had bowed, not from fear but from love. But that love had curdled into longing, and longing into envy. The angels above continued to chant their endless hymns, their voices pure and unbroken, while Iblīs, the one who had once led their chorus, now stood beneath them, silent, burning without smoke, speaking to no one but the wind. He would watch the angels descend and ascend again, carrying divine commands, their wings gleaming with purpose. And though their radiance stung his eyes, he could not look away. They were what he had been, obedient without pride, brilliant without self. He whispered to himself, not in arrogance now, but in grief. Once I too was near. The stars above flickered, indifferent, as if they could not bear to remember the day one of their own was torn from their ranks. And below, on the newborn earth, the children of Adam built their altars and forgot them, built them again and forgot once more. Each generation rose like waves and fell into dust, while he, cursed with unending life, remained, the only constant witness to mankind's cycle of sin and surrender. He began to see them not as enemies, but as mirrors. Each heart was a smaller version of his own story, light breathed into dust, capable of both remembrance and rebellion. When they prayed, he remembered what it was to be close. When they sinned, he remembered the sweetness of defiance. When they repented, he felt the ache of what he could no longer do. And so, his torment was twofold, for though he hated them, he also saw in them everything he had lost. In the still hours before dawn, when the veil between worlds thins, he would wander near the throne's reflection, a realm unseen, where even the shadows bow in silence. He could not enter, yet he could sense it, the pulse of divine remembrance, like waves of light moving through creation. It was there, among the remnants of radiance that fell with him, that he built his dwelling, not a palace, but a sanctuary of sorrow. Its walls were made of ashes that once glowed with holy light. Its floor shimmered faintly, as though each step still remembered heaven. And there he waited. Not for redemption, but for the end. For though he had vowed to mislead until the last day, there was a part of him, buried deep beneath fire and defiance, that longed for silence to end. Not to rise again, but simply to rest. Because even eternal flame grows weary when it burns without purpose. Sometimes, when the winds of the unseen world turn cold, the angels who guard the edges of creation hear him whispering into the void. They do not answer. But his voice drifts through the unseen, carrying the weight of a truth too bitter to forget. I was never beyond his reach, only beyond my own return. The throne does not speak, but in its stillness lies an answer that even rebellion serves the story. That without his refusal, mankind would never have known the meaning of choice. That even the one who fell became part of the test that defines faith itself. And so, the ages roll on. Empires rise and vanish. Prophets come and go, each carrying the echo of that ancient defiance and the call to return. Iblīs listens to every revelation, knows every word by heart, yet cannot utter a single one in worship. He stands in the shadow of truth, forever near, forever apart. There are nights when a soul, heavy with doubt, feels the weight of unseen eyes. When a whisper passes not from outside, but within, gentle, almost kind. You could be more. You deserve more. Why bow? Why wait? And in that whisper lives the echo of the first rebellion. Yet there are also nights when the same whisper breaks, soft, trembling, almost human. You were made for light. Don't follow me into the dark. For even the fallen at times grow weary of leading others astray. And somewhere in that weariness lies the last trace of who he was, the morning star, the angel who once sang creation into being. His fall was not simply punishment. It was transformation from light that served to light that questions, from flame that worshiped to flame that remembers. And when the last dawn rises, when all hearts are weighed and the veil of time is torn, even he will stand before the one who made him. No crown, no fire, no pride, only the echo of what was once divine within him. And perhaps in that final silence, as creation returns to its source, even the fallen flame will flicker one last time in reverence. Not to seek forgiveness, but to remember what it felt like to belong. For near the throne, where ashes still glow faintly in the dark, the story of pride and mercy burns on, unending, unforgotten, eternal. Before the first grief touched the world, there was only stillness. The garden, vast and endless, breathed in rhythm with creation. Rivers shimmered like veins of silver beneath canopies of light. Trees whispered prayers without words. Every leaf bowed in remembrance. Every stone knew its place. There was no time, no distance, only presence. And within that sanctified stillness walked Adam and his companion, two souls wrapped in innocence, their hearts unscarred by fear. They did not know sorrow, for nothing had yet been lost. They did not know pride, for nothing was yet theirs to claim. They only knew gratitude, the echo of the divine breath within them. But in the shadow between the leaves, another presence stirred. He had watched them from afar, unseen, patient as time itself. The one once called the morning star, now cloaked in silence, looked upon their peace with a fire that did not warm. To see them near the mercy he had lost, it was a wound that bled without end. Yet envy was not the root of his sorrow, it was longing. He did not hate them for being loved. He hated that he still desired that love. The garden shimmered with purity, but even purity, if untested, is not yet truth. So when the command came, eat freely of all save for one tree, heaven itself watched in silence, for the weight of obedience was about to be measured. The forbidden tree was not guarded by thorns nor surrounded by flame. It stood quietly in the midst of abundance, its branches heavy with knowledge, its shadow cool and inviting. The command was simple, but simplicity is the sharpest trial. For what is faith if it cannot say no to desire? Iblīs moved closer, not in form but in whisper. He did not speak as enemy but as friend. His voice was soft like wind before dawn, barely felt, yet shaping every leaf it touched. "Did your Lord truly forbid you this tree?" he asked gently. Adam paused. The question was not accusation but curiosity, a mirror of his own thoughts. Iblīs continued, "Would he deny you the knowledge that makes you eternal? Would he keep from you the secret of forever when he has made you in his image?" The words did not burn. They shimmered half-truths wrapped in tenderness. He spoke not of rebellion but of potential, not of disobedience but of destiny. For that is how deception cloaks itself, not in ugliness but in the appearance of light. The woman listened too, her heart still pure but curious. She had not yet known doubt and thus did not recognize it. "We were told not to approach it," she said softly, "lest we become among the wrongdoers." And the whisper, like a serpent of sound, answered, "You were told because he wishes to keep you beneath him. Yet are you not made from his spirit? Should not spirit rise to where it came from?" The garden trembled, as if the wind itself recoiled from those words. For this was the same lie that once unmade the light. But Adam and his companion were not malicious. They were innocent, and innocence does not see deceit, it only sees sincerity. So they reached together and took from the tree whose roots touched both earth and heaven. The fruit was not sweet, it was heavy, filled with awareness. When they tasted it, the garden sighed and silence broke. Light dimmed, wind fell still, and they saw for the first time that they were bare, not in body alone but in soul, naked before the gaze of truth, shivering with the weight of choice. Then came the call, not of anger but of sorrow. "Did I not forbid you that tree?" The voice was not thunder, it was heartbreak. And they wept not because they were caught but because they had forgotten. They fell not in pride but in grief. And from that grief, repentance was born. Iblīs watched from the shadows, his heart torn between triumph and agony. He had succeeded, yet failed. For they would be forgiven. He would not. He had brought them into exile, but their exile would lead them back. His would not. He turned from the garden as the gates closed, his laughter echoing through the void, laughter that sounded more like mourning than joy. The world below awaited its first dawn, and the heavens watched in silence, for the story of mankind had begun not in perfection but in choice. The garden's light lingered in the air for a moment longer, then folded into the unseen. And somewhere near the veil of eternity, the fallen flame whispered to the earth, "Remember me when you forget him." For that is his oldest vow, not to destroy but to distract, not to erase faith but to delay it. And so every whisper since that day carries a memory of that first sound, soft, beautiful, poisonous. Would he really deny you what you deserve? The exile began not with thunder but with silence. The garden did not rage against them. It simply closed, its gates folding like the wings of a grieving angel. The rivers that once sang fell quiet. The fragrance of eternal peace lifted, leaving behind the raw scent of earth. Adam and his companion stood at the threshold, trembling beneath the weight of what they had done. The light that once clothed them had dimmed, replaced by the naked chill of awareness. They clung to one another, their hearts heavy not with defiance but with distance. And the voice of their Lord reached them not as anger but as truth. "Descend, all of you. There shall be for you on the earth dwelling and provision for a time." Those words did not condemn, they consecrated. For the descent was not punishment, it was purpose. As they fell toward the newborn world, clouds parted like pages unrolling across eternity. Beneath them lay mountains still warm from creation, oceans like mirrors of mercy, and winds that had yet to learn their names. The world was waiting, vast, beautiful, unfinished. And upon its soil they would learn remembrance. But not all who descended came in remorse. Far beyond them, cloaked in flame and distance, Iblīs followed, unseen, uninvited, unrepentant. He descended not as man but as shadow. And where the light of their steps touched the earth, his darkness followed, seeping into its folds. He did not curse God, he cursed mercy. For he had seen it given to those who fell after him, and he knew he would never be offered the same. In that bitterness he found a purpose darker than pride, to make mankind forget what he could not. He watched them build shelter, watched their tears mix with the dust, watched them speak their first words of prayer. And though he could not pray, he understood every syllable. He knew what it meant to ache for nearness. He knew what it meant to cry into silence. For ages that passed like breaths of God, he waited not in haste, but in patience, for patience is the weapon of those who cannot die. And when the first children were born, when the earth began to echo with laughter and labor, his whispers returned. He did not appear as flame, nor with wings, nor with horns. He came as thought, a question that entered softly, unnoticed. Why him and not me? Why share when you can claim? Why forgive when you can be right? And humanity listened because the whisper was not foreign. It was familiar, it spoke in their own voice. The first jealousy, the first lie, the first drop of blood spilled by a brother's hand, all carried his unseen fingerprint. But even then he did not rejoice. For every act of evil he inspired was only a shadow of his own first act. He did not seek destruction for its own sake. He sought proof that mankind was unworthy of mercy. And yet, time and again, they prayed and were forgiven. That was the torment that burned him deepest, that though he had sworn to lead them astray, they still returned. And every time they did, his fire dimmed, not extinguished, but wounded by the sight of what he could never do. He wandered the earth as ages turned, unseen in deserts and palaces alike. He watched the prophets rise, each one a light piercing the veil of his whispers. From N.U. Macron, letter 1E25 to Ibrahim, from Musa to letter 2BFI Macron, S.A. Macron. Each brought words that tore through the smoke he cast upon hearts. Yet he learned to adapt. If truth could not be destroyed, it could be diluted. If light could not be extinguished, it could be scattered. And so he began to whisper not against belief, but beneath it. He turned zeal into arrogance, faith into vanity, devotion into division. He did not tell men to deny God, he told them to claim him, to believe that their way was the only way, their heart the holiest, their voice the purest. And in doing so, he birthed 1,000 faiths from one, each convinced it was alone in the truth. That is how darkness grows, not through rejection of light, but through imitation of it. Yet in every age there were those who remembered, those who bowed not out of fear but out of love, those whose hearts whispered not I am, but you are. And when their lips touched the earth, the fire in him trembled, for he could feel through them the presence he had lost. It is said that once, long after the garden had become myth, he stood upon a mountain beneath the stars and spoke into the void. If I were given one moment, only one, to bow again, would you take me back? But no answer came. Only the sound of wind passing through the stones, the same wind that once carried his name in praise. And so he waits, through generations that forget and remember, sin and repent. His kingdom is vast but hollow. His army is endless but faithless. For no matter how many hearts he darkens, none can fill the silence where mercy used to dwell. And still his whisper moves through the night, as gentle as it was in Eden, not shouting, not demanding, but asking the oldest question: would he really forgive you after this? For he knows that doubt, not sin, is the root of all distance. And he knows too that the closer you come to the light, the longer your shadow grows. The night the first fire touched the human heart, the stars did not move. They stood still, as if heaven itself was listening to a story it had heard before. And below, in the vast dark where earth met breath, the whisper of Iblīs passed through creation like wind passing through reeds, unseen but never unheard. It was the whisper that once tempted angels to curiosity, that turned obedience into thought and thought into question. But now it flowed through mortal veins, soft, familiar, like the sound of one's own reasoning. For mankind was not born to be perfect. They were born to be tested, not in the absence of God, but in the silence that reveals him. And so the story repeated itself, not in heaven this time, but within the small, trembling sanctuaries of human hearts. Every soul became a mirror of that first rebellion, every prayer a plea to remember what was once forgotten. Iblīs moved through generations like smoke, through kingdoms of stone and tents of dust, through temples, deserts, and dreams. He no longer appeared as flame. He had become subtler, an idea, a suggestion, a reflection. He whispered to those who ruled, "The world bends to you because you are chosen." He whispered to those who obeyed, "You are unseen, unloved, forgotten." He whispered to lovers, "Take what you deserve." And to the lonely, "No one hears you but me." He spoke in every tongue across every age, but always with the same intention: to replace remembrance with self. Yet for all his cunning, there were moments when he hesitated. Moments when he would see a man kneel in the stillness of dawn, whispering words of forgiveness through tears, words that rose like light through his own darkness. And in those moments, though his pride held firm, something within him ached, for he knew what it meant to be near. He could not cry, but if fire could weep, the mountains would have heard it. There are whispers among the ancient jinn, old even before the time of Adam, that sometimes, when the world is silent, indeed all souls are asleep, the fallen one kneels, not in repentance but in remembrance, not to seek return but to recall what it once felt like to belong. And when dawn breaks, he rises again, unchanged, unhealed, unredeemed. For pride does not vanish in a moment. It is a wound that refuses to close. Meanwhile, humanity grew, and with them so did the whispers. They built idols, not of stone alone, but of their own desires. They bowed not to the Creator, but to creation, to wealth, to status, to knowledge, to the illusion of control. Each age built new towers of Babel, and each tower fell, yet the pattern remained. And in every fall, Iblīs heard an echo of his own, a melody that reminded him he was not alone in defiance. But what he could never understand, what tortured him most, was that mankind was allowed to rise again. For every prophet sent, for every sinner forgiven, the distance he carried grew wider. Mercy descended upon the very soil he had cursed, and still he was left in silence. He envied not their pleasures nor their paradise, he envied their tears. For tears, he realized, were a form of worship denied to him. Once, as the story is told among the hidden, he approached a dying saint, a man so near to God that even angels lingered at his side. And Iblīs, invisible yet trembling, whispered to him, "Do you not fear the fire that waits?" The old man smiled, his lips cracked and dry. "I do not fear the fire," he said. "I fear forgetting the one who made it." And Iblīs, for the first time in eons, was silent. He withdrew into the unseen places, where no prayer reached and no light fell. There, he pondered the mystery of mercy, that even after all the harm he had sown, the same breath that gave him life continued to sustain him. For he, too, still existed only by divine will. Even rebellion must be permitted by the one who wrote it. And so he understood, not in humility, but in awe, that he could never escape the one he defied. That even in exile he lived in the mercy he despised. The story of the garden did not end with banishment. It was the beginning of a cycle that would shape the world, the dance of remembrance and forgetting, of falling and returning, of pride and repentance. Every soul would walk through its own garden, face its own whisper, eat its own fruit, and bear its own exile. And through each journey, the divine promise would remain that the gates of mercy, once closed, still wait to open again. As for the fallen flame, he walks still unseen, through every heart that questions the silence of God. Not as enemy alone, but as reflection, the shadow that reminds us how far light can fall and how deeply it can still be found. For even now, when the night grows heavy and the stars hide their gaze, there is a whisper not his, but older, soft, eternal. "Turn back. I am still near." And somewhere in the hollow chambers of the unseen, Iblīs hears it. He knows it. But pride, ancient and unbroken, keeps him from answering. And thus the garden remains not lost, but waiting for the day when silence ends and all things remember where they began. Before there was clay, before there was time, there was fire. Not the fire of the world, not the flame that burns in hearths or devours forests, but the fire of origin, unseen by mortal eyes, woven from obedience and energy, alive with the remembrance of its maker. From that fire the jinn were formed, spirits of smokeless flame, roaming between light and matter. And among them one shone brighter than the rest, a being of pure will and fierce devotion. His name was Iblīs. He was not born into rebellion. He was not created to fall. He was once among the most steadfast of the unseen, one who worshipped the eternal not out of duty but out of awe. When the angels gathered near the throne, their voices joined in a single endless prayer, their wings trembling with the weight of his nearness. But Iblīs, though made of fire, not light, stood among them. By permission, by honor. He was the only one of his kind allowed to rise that near. There beside the luminous hosts he beheld what no other aflame had seen, the throne, radiant and beyond form, veiled in uncreated light. And as he gazed upon it, a truth carved itself into his being. There is no beauty that does not come from him. For eons uncounted he served with loyalty beyond question. When commands came, he was first to act. When trials came, he endured. He prayed longer, bowed deeper, sang louder. He was not merely obedient, he was beloved. And yet near the very source of light, the first shadow was born, because proximity is not purity. One can stand near the throne and still be far from surrender. As he ascended higher in favor, a single thought soft as dust entered his heart. Why not me? Why not the one who burns without smoke, who has worshipped without pause, who has stood beside angels though born of flame? Why should only they be called the pure, when I purified myself in fire? That was the spark, small, harmless, hidden. But all fires begin as whispers. The throne shimmered with the command that shaped creation, the divine intention to bring forth another form, one not of flame nor light, but of earth. And Iblīs, standing nearest, felt it before any other, a decree so vast it shook the unseen realms. The Eternal spoke, "I am creating upon the earth a successor, one who will inherit my trust." The angels bowed their heads in wonder. But within Iblīs something trembled. The thought returned, why not me? He looked upon the forming shape of Adam, still silent and lifeless, a vessel of clay awaiting the breath of the most merciful, and the fire within him recoiled. Clay, cold, heavy, fragile, would be given a place he had sought for ages. He, the flame that could rise to the stars, was now to bow before dust. But no one saw his turmoil. His wings still glowed with worship, his voice still joined the chorus. Only the All-Knowing saw the seed beginning to grow. Only the Eternal heard the faintest rustle of pride beneath his prayers. Then came the command. The light of divine breath entered the clay. Adam opened his eyes and heaven shuddered. Every angel fell to their knees, overcome by the scent of the Spirit that mirrored the one who breathed it, and Iblīs stood still. His flame flickered not with defiance yet, but with disbelief. He had seen beauty beyond beauty, yet never one shaped from soil. He had heard songs sung by angels, yet none so silent as this man's first breath. He felt for the first time something like jealousy wrapped in awe. The throne's decree came, bow before Adam. A command simple in words, infinite in meaning. And in that single moment eternity fractured. The angels obeyed without question, but Iblīs, the one who had bowed to none but God, hesitated. His fire rippled with thought. Should the pure kneel before dust? The question felt righteous. The question felt true, and that is how pride disguises itself, not in evil but in logic. He whispered to himself, "I bow only to you." And heaven heard silence where there should have been obedience. In that silence the throne's light dimmed, not in weakness but in grief. For even the act of disobedience was foreseen, written, permitted, so that creation might learn humility. The voice of the Eternal came forth, calm as judgment, sharp as truth. "What has kept you from bowing to what I have made with my hands?" And the answer fell like a shadow across eternity. "I am better than him. You made me from fire and him from clay." It was not rage that cast him down. It was revelation. For in that moment he unveiled what was hidden all along, the love of self before love of the source. He was not expelled for disobedience alone, but for blindness, for seeing only substance, not spirit, for forgetting that all forms, whether of light or flame or earth, are but vessels for the same breath. And so, near the throne he had once adored, his fire turned cold. The angels stepped back. Silence fell. And with it the heavens learned that even among the radiant, pride can grow like ash beneath the altar of worship. The silence that followed his refusal was unlike any silence that had ever been. It was not the calm of peace, nor the stillness of reverence. It was the pause between creation and consequence, the moment before mercy turns to decree. All of heaven waited. The wings of countless angels trembled in suspended devotion, their eyes lowered, their light dimmed. For though they could not comprehend rebellion, they could feel its weight. And there, standing alone before the throne he had once loved, Iblīs burned without warmth. The same fire that once worshipped now raged against its maker, not out of hatred but out of wounded devotion. For he did not reject the Creator, he rejected the command. And in that single distinction the eternal divide was born. He looked upon Adam, the form of clay, still glowing faintly from the divine breath, and his flame rippled with disbelief. He had bowed 1,000 times before light greater than this, had endured trials of obedience beyond mortal comprehension. Yet now before a creature made of dust he was asked to kneel. He whispered to himself, "Was I not faithful? Was I not near? Was my worship not enough?" His thoughts, once hymns, became arguments, and pride, dressed in the robes of reason, whispered back, "You deserve more." Then came the voice, not in anger but in clarity. "What prevented you from bowing when I commanded you?" The fire flared within him, fierce and trembling. He answered not in humility but in comparison. "I am better than him. You made me from fire and him from clay." The words hung in the air like ash, heavy, irreversible. The heavens shuddered, for it was the first time creation had heard a being speak not as servant but as self. The Eternal replied, "Descend from it, for in it no pride shall be." Well, and the command became reality. The light that had wrapped around him for ages withdrew. The warmth of nearness turned to the cold of separation. He felt the loss not as pain, but as emptiness, as if the very purpose of his flame had been extinguished. But even as he fell, the voice called once more, "Go forth. You are cast out, yet respite is granted until the appointed day." It was not mercy that surprised him. It was patience. For punishment without annihilation is a harder fate. Be allowed to exist, knowing what was lost, is a wound that does not heal. And so in that moment defiance became destiny. Iblīs raised his head and spoke again, this time not to justify but to vow. "Because you have led me astray, I will sit in ambush upon your straight path. I will come upon them from before them and from behind them, from their right and their left, and you will find most of them ungrateful." It was not a cry of rage. It was a covenant, cold, deliberate, eternal. And the heavens fell silent again, for even rebellion had been woven into the tapestry of divine will. The angels turned their faces away, their tears like rain made of light. They did not pity him, they pitied what he once was. The fire that had once lit the corners of heaven was now the fire that would test the hearts of men. And God said, "My servants, you shall have no power over them except those who follow you in error." With that, the decree was sealed. Iblīs stood in the vast emptiness between realms, neither in light nor in darkness, neither in grace nor in damnation. He was not yet the accursed, he was the separated. His wings, now ash-gray and hollow, folded behind him. His light dimmed but did not die. For the Eternal had granted him existence, not as reward but as purpose. To test the children of clay, to mirror to them what pride can become. And as the echoes of the decree faded into eternity, he spoke not to heaven but to himself. "If I cannot be nearest to the throne, then I will dwell nearest to those who forget it." That was the birth of the whisper, the bridge between exile and influence. He became the unseen thought behind doubt, the shadow that questions. Why should I bow? Not to destroy faith, but to challenge it, for he knew that the same freedom that allowed him to fall would allow mankind to rise. The angels returned to their stations, their wings brushing the veils of light, restoring the harmony that his defiance had broken. But beneath that harmony, a new tension lived, the knowledge that obedience is not born from sight alone, but from surrender. And the Eternal, in his wisdom, allowed the story to unfold. For even rebellion, when seen from eternity, becomes revelation. Iblīs descended then, not into fire, but into the unseen world, where time has no meaning. He wandered through shadows, his flame flickering without purpose. Yet each flicker carried a memory, the throne's brilliance, the warmth of nearness, the sound of light itself. He had lost everything, and yet the one he defied still sustained his existence. That was the irony of his fall. He could rebel against God, but he could never escape him. The fire within him whispered what his tongue would not say. "Even in distance I am held." But pride, like iron, cannot bend once forged. And so, though a part of him remembered, he would never return. He became the fire that waits not to consume, but to test. He became the unseen hand that touches hearts to see which will remember and which will follow. For the throne still reigns, and the fire still burns, each fulfilling what was written long before time began. When the decree of exile fell upon him, heaven did not rage, it grieved. The angels lowered their wings, their songs dimming into silence, for they had witnessed something that had never been seen before, the separation of light from its source. They did not see punishment. They saw sorrow written into creation itself. And as Iblīs fell, his descent was not like the fall of stone, swift and final, but like the drifting of a flame torn from the lantern that once sheltered it. He fell through realms unseen, through veils of brightness and void, through memories of worship that clung to him like smoke to air. He looked upward as he fell, and the throne shone far above, distant now, unreachable. Its radiance burned into his eyes, not with pain but with longing. For even in rebellion, his heart still knew what it had lost. When he reached the realm of flame, the place where the jinn were born, the air trembled with his presence. They gathered, curious, fearful, for he had once been their brightest. His wings were dim now, his fire no longer golden but veiled in shadow. Yet he still carried an authority that made even the proudest of them bow. He spoke not to command but to declare, "I am cast out from the mercy that once crowned me. But hear this, I remain by the will of the one who cast me, and if I cannot be Ni, are his light, I will dwell in the reflection of it. I will move through the hearts of those he favors, and I will test the truth of their obedience." His words echoed through the realms of flame, heavy as iron, shaping the unseen order that would endure until the end of time. Some jinn trembled and fled from him. Others, intoxicated by his fire, drew near, forming around him a legion of shadows. Not angels, not men, but spirits bound by pride, destined to serve his vow. Yet even as his new kingdom rose in darkness, the memory of the throne lingered within him. It haunted him not as regret but as reminder, for he could not forget the way divine light had once felt against his wings. He could not forget the sound of creation praising in harmony. He could not forget the silence before the command to bow. Sometimes, when the worlds below were still, he would whisper into the void, not to deceive, but to remember, "There was a time when I too was light." The wind carried his words through the layers of the unseen, and the angels who passed near the lower heavens heard them. Some wept for him, others turned away. For in that whisper lay the echo of every heart that would one day break from its maker, the same cry of separation, the same song of pride and pain intertwined. The throne remained unmoved. The decree was complete. Yet in his boundless mercy the Creator allowed Iblīs what no other had been given: time. Time to wander, time to tempt, time to see. For even rebellion, when given enough time, reveals the truth of what it serves. And thus, Iblīs' fire did not die, it transformed. It became the fire of whispering, the flame of testing, the spark that would flicker in the corners of every human soul. He learned to move through thought like wind through grass, unseen, yet everywhere. He would rest upon the edge of a prayer, waiting for distraction to open the door. He would breathe into the heart of arrogance and let it grow until it called itself conviction. He would dress despair in the robe of humility and make the sinner believe he could never be forgiven. His art was not destruction, it was distortion. He could not create evil, but he could twist good until it looked like pride. He could not silence worship, but he could turn it into noise. And all the while, the throne watched, patient, knowing that the very test Iblīs carried would become the path of redemption for those who resisted him. For in truth, his fall became man's mirror. He became the lesson written into every heart, that no matter how high one rises, the moment the I outweighs the you, the light begins to fade. And in the depths of his loneliness, even Iblīs came to understand, the distance between pride and love is only the distance between I and you. He wandered near the edge of the heavens, never again to cross their boundary. But sometimes when the angels recited words of remembrance, their light reflected upon him for an instant, and he burned not with rage but with yearning. He turned away quickly, for longing was more unbearable than the fire of hell itself. So he descended lower, nearer to earth, nearer to mankind, and with each generation his voice softened, his touch grew subtler, his patience deeper. He no longer sought to overthrow heaven. He sought only to keep man from looking up. For the greatest victory of darkness is not to destroy light. It is to convince the heart that the light was never there. And yet, despite all his craft, there are still those who remember. In every age, in every night, there are souls who whisper in the silence, "I seek refuge in the one who made me." And in that whisper, the fire of Iblīs trembles, for it knows that even now, after ages of rebellion, the throne he defied still reigns. For the throne and the fire were both written by the same hand. And though one burns and the other shines, both bear witness to the same truth, that nothing, not pride, not distance, not even defiance, can exist outside the will of the one who is beyond all beginning. Before the earth had known the weight of kingdoms, before prophets walked among men, there was a covenant made in the unseen, not written in ink, not carved in stone, but breathed into the silence between rebellion and mercy. It was the covenant of shadows, the vow of Iblīs, the whisper that would follow every soul born of clay. When he stood at the threshold of exile, flame dimmed, wings folded, the memory of the throne fading like the last ember before dawn, he made his promise. He did not plead for forgiveness. He asked for time. "Grant me respite," he said, "until the day they are raised from their graves." And the voice, vast and serene, replied, "You are of those granted respite." The decree sealed itself in eternity. The fire that refused to bow was allowed to live until the final dawn, not as mercy, but as test, a living echo of pride, a reminder to all creation that will without surrender leads only to shadow. He did not smile when the command was granted. He did not bow in gratitude. He only whispered as one might to the memory of a lost light, "Then by your might I will lead them astray all, save your sincere servants." And thus began the covenant, not of companionship but of contrast, between mercy and misguidance, between remembrance and forgetting, between those who fall and rise again and the one who fell forever. The heavens trembled as the word spread through creation. The angels lowered their wings, their eyes heavy with sorrow. They had never seen defiance wrapped in devotion, nor hatred so intertwined with love. For Iblīs did not seek to destroy mankind out of malice. He sought to prove them unworthy of what he had lost, to show that the clay which replaced him was no vessel of faith, only weakness sculpted in dust. But what he could not understand, what he could never understand, was that the mercy of the Eternal does not depend on perfection. It descends upon those who stumble, then turn back, and that turning back was something his pride would never allow. So he descended once more, not into fire, but into the folds of the unseen earth, where he began to weave his network of whispers. He moved through hearts like a shadow through water unseen, yet shaping the currents. He learned the scent of fear, the pulse of doubt, the tremor of desire. He became a student of the human soul. He found that man was easy to sway, not because he was evil, but because he was forgetful. Forgetfulness, Iblīs learned, is the gateway of pride. When man forgets who breathed him into being, he begins to think he stands alone. And in that loneliness, Iblīs finds his home. He did not strike in daylight. He moved at dusk, that sacred hour when light and dark mingle, when certainty begins to fade, when the heart questions what the eyes cannot see. He whispered not to the wicked, but to the weary. Not to the faithless, but to the faithful, those who had tasted light but grew tired of holding it. He would say, "Rest, you have done enough." He would say, "You are better than they." He would say, "You can always repent tomorrow." And the heart, so hungry for comfort, would listen. Yet for all his cunning, he could not force a single soul to sin. He could only invite, only suggest. The door to evil could never be opened from without, only from within. And this, too, was divine wisdom, that the one who rebelled through pride would only have power through permission. He could whisper to the ear but never touch the will. He could call but never compel. And still he became the most patient creature in existence, for time was his weapon and pride his sustenance. He whispered to tribes, to empires, to prophets, enemies, to scholars and kings, each according to their desire. He did not tempt the wise with ignorance, nor the righteous with evil. He tempted the wise with certainty, the righteous with pride. And in the silence of ages he built his dominion not with stone but with thoughts. His throne was not in fire but in the heart of forgetfulness. But even among his legions there were moments of hesitation. Some jinn who followed him would ask, "Do you not regret it? The light, the closeness, the peace?" And Iblīs, their master of shadows, would answer softly, "Regret is for those who can return. I am beyond return." Yet when the night grew long and all voices ceased, the wind would sometimes carry a different tone from his fire, something quieter, almost human. A sigh, a whisper only God could hear. not of repentance but of remembrance. For even the one who defied still belonged to the story written by the hand he defied, and the Eternal in his justice left him to his vow. For though Iblīs had chosen shadow, his existence would make light shine clearer. Though he sought to darken hearts, he would only sharpen their need for guidance. Though he vowed to lead astray, he would drive the faithful closer to their Lord. For the will of the Creator cannot be undone by creation. Even the whisper serves the word. Thus, the covenant was sealed, the ancient balance between temptation and truth. The fire would test, the clay would endure, and mercy would remain. And so the world began to turn, each age another verse, each soul another page, while in the silence between the whisper moved still, not as noise but as reminder. That pride was born from light, and light, if left unguarded, can fall. There are pacts made in the light of day, and there are pacts whispered in the breath of twilight. The covenant of Iblīs was the latter. It was not proclaimed to the heavens. It was hidden in the hollow where pride meets purpose, where rebellion disguises itself as devotion. After the decree of exile, he did not rest. He did not wander aimlessly. He began his work not with wrath, but with patience, for he knew the power of time. Time was the thread through which his whisper would pass from one generation to the next, weaving his voice into the pulse of creation itself. He walked unseen through the layers of the earth, watching the children of Adam scatter across lands and seas. He saw them till the soil, build homes, love and grieve, pray and forget. Every tear they shed reminded him of what he could no longer feel. Every act of worship reminded him of what he had lost, and every act of pride reminded him of what he had become. He learned their patterns. He watched them at their weakest, in hunger, in solitude, in silence. He watched them at their strongest, in triumph, in beauty, in pride. And he found that both strength and weakness were doors. So he divided his army, not of swords but of whispers. Some would speak to kings, feeding them illusions of eternity. Others would sit beside the poor, convincing them they were forgotten. Some would twist faith into arrogance. Others would twist sin into despair. He became not one voice, but 1,000. 1,000 reflections of the same ancient lie, you are enough without him. And from that lie grew civilizations. Empires rose with towers so high they brushed the clouds, each brick laid upon the foundation of pride. Temples echoed not with the names of the eternal, but with songs of self-made gods. Men worshipped gold and called it order. They worshipped power and called it peace. They worshipped their own reflection and called it enlightenment. And Iblīs, hidden in the folds of their progress, smiled not in joy but in recognition. For he saw in their striving the same flame that once consumed him. Yet among them there were always hearts he could not touch. Those who remembered in silence, who fell and rose, who erred and wept and returned. Those who bowed not because they were commanded, but because they knew that to bow is to breathe. It was these hearts that wounded him most. For every time a soul returned, the echo of his own refusal grew louder within him. And though he would never admit it to his legions, he envied them not for their paradise but for their tears. He once said to his followers, the jinn who gathered around his dimming flame, "Do not weep for what you lose, weep for what you cannot return to." And his voice, though filled with pride, trembled. For even in defiance, truth finds a way to speak. There came a night unlike others, still, ancient, holy. The angels descended to the lower heavens, bearing decrees and blessings. The stars shimmered like verses written in light. And the gates of mercy opened upon the world. It was Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. Even the fire of Iblīs grew restless. He withdrew from the world that night, hiding in the folds of the unseen, for he could not bear the sound of forgiveness. It scorched him more than any flame. He listened as millions of prayers rose through the air, broken, imperfect, human. He watched as hearts once blackened by sin began to glow again with hope. He saw chains of despair break like threads of smoke before dawn. And though he could not feel envy anymore, something deep within him ached. He whispered to himself, "They disobey and are forgiven. I obeyed and was cast out." And the wind answered softly. They bowed after they fell. The truth pierced him like light through shadow. He turned away, deeper into the void, covering his flame with his own darkness. For the greatest torment of the fallen is not fire. It is watching the mercy that he rejected continue without end. Still, his vow stood. He could not return, but he could still ruin. He would build a world where forgetfulness reigned, a world so loud that no one could hear the silence of God. A world where every man would believe he was free, yet live bound to the same whisper that bound him. He taught humanity to name their desires as virtues, their pride as progress, their rebellion as awakening. And though he succeeded in many hearts, he never conquered them all. For in every generation there rose a few who remembered what the rest forgot, the covenant of the soul, spoken before creation. Am I not your Lord? And the souls replied, yes, we bear witness. Those who remembered that moment even faintly could not be taken by him fully. They could stumble, they could sin, but they would rise. For remembrance, even in its faintest whisper, is stronger than deception in its loudest roar. And so his shadow stretched across time but never claimed it. He ruled over minds but never over hearts. For the heart belongs only to the one who breathed it into being. And that truth, that unbreakable law of mercy, is what keeps even the mightiest whisperer trembling in the dark. For Iblīs can touch many things but not the sincere. And every time a human soul remembers, the fire of his envy burns anew. Night fell softly upon the newborn earth. The stars shimmered like unblinking eyes, watching a story older than time unfold again, the story of obedience and defiance, of remembrance and forgetting. And within silence between worlds, the whisper moved not as sound but as intent. Iblīs walked unseen among the living. He had no throne, no kingdom of gold, yet all the empires of men would unknowingly build for him monuments of thought, temples of pride, altars of self. He did not appear with horns or smoke. He came as suggestion, an echo of the thought that once destroyed him. He whispered into the hearts of rulers, cloaking pride in the language of destiny. He whispered into the prayers of the pious, wrapping arrogance in the robes of devotion. He whispered into the dreams of poets, telling them their words could outshine revelation. And mankind listened, again and again, as though his voice was their own. He did not rage against heaven. He raged against mercy. For mercy was the one thing he could neither understand nor endure. He had seen it forgive the guilty and lift the broken, while he, who had once been pure, remained in exile. That was the wound he could never stop touching. And so he made it his mission to pass it on, to infect every heart with the same ache of distance. He whispered not just to turn men from God, but to make them feel unworthy of returning. It was not disbelief he desired, it was despair. For despair is the shadow of pride, it says, even he cannot forgive me. And that, he knew, was the whisper that had sealed his fate. As centuries unfolded, Iblīs watched the world change. He watched prophets rise like lamps in the dark, their words piercing his veils of deception. He watched people weep in repentance and angels record their tears. And each time his fire dimmed a little more. But still he endured, not by strength but by purpose. For every act of worship he had a distraction. For every act of charity a trace of pride. For every truth a twin reflection twisted just enough to blur the light. He learned the art of subtlety. No longer did he say, there is no God. He said, there is, but he has forgotten you. No longer did he say, do evil. He said, do what feels right. No longer did he say, be proud. He said, know your worth. For he understood, the easiest way to darken light is not to extinguish it, but to make it shine only for the self. And yet, despite all his mastery, there was one thing he could not touch: sincerity. The pure heart, even if broken, is a fortress. Its cracks do not let darkness in, they let mercy in. And Iblīs, the father of pride, could not enter where humility lived. He knew this truth well. It haunted him as he watched the prophets call their people to remembrance. He would whisper to them too, yes, even to them, for arrogance spares no soul. But the prophets did not answer him. They answered only the one who sent them. And so the whisperer withdrew to the edge of the unseen, his flame flickering like a candle trapped in glass. He had become what he once feared most, a reminder. For every act of his deception revealed the strength of faith it could not destroy. There are stories, spoken only among the angels, that say he once stood again before the throne not in defiance but in awe. That the Eternal allowed him to witness, for a moment, what mercy looks like when it descends. And though his heart remained unbent, his silence in that moment was worship in disguise. For even pride must bow before truth, if only inwardly. But the story of his vow was not yet done. The covenant still holds, the fire still moves through generations. It breathes in moments of anger, of envy, of greed, of doubt. It stands behind the mirror when we forget who we are, and it waits always for the next heart to listen. Yet the same mercy he despised continues to flow, unending, undefeated. Every soul that remembers breaks his chain a little more. Every tear that falls in repentance cools the fire he once kindled. Every whisper of "I seek refuge in the most merciful" silences 1,000 of his echoes, and he knows it. He feels it each time a human kneels sincerely without pride. That single act, one bow, one tear, one whispered "forgive me," shakes his kingdom more than 1,000 wars. For his war was never against man. It was always against humility, against surrender, against the very thing that makes the fallen rise again. And that is why, in the end, his defeat is already written. For he cannot destroy what he once was light. He can only dim it. But light, even when dim, is still light. As the ages fold into dust and the final dawn draws near, the covenant of shadows will end. The whisper will fade. The fire will bow, not in choice, but in recognition. And the one who wrote both mercy and wrath will call all things back to their origin. Then, and only then, will the fire be still. And in that stillness, perhaps even he will understand what he denied. That obedience is not surrender of freedom, it is return to the source. There is a war that does not echo with swords. It has no armies, no banners, no blood upon the earth. It is the war that began before time, the struggle between breath and dust, between remembrance and forgetting, between the spirit that rises and the clay that pulls it down. When the Eternal breathed into Adam, that breath carried not only life but choice. And choice, though sacred, is also a battlefield. For within it live both the whisper of light and the whisper of flame. The angels watched as man took his first steps upon the soil, their wings heavy with prophecy. They knew the story would not end in Eden. They knew the one who fell from light would follow the one made of dust, and that between them all of creation would tremble. Iblīs stood upon a mountain of shadow, unseen by men, unseen by beasts. He watched the children of Adam multiply, their hands building, their hearts forgetting. He had learned patience. He had learned silence. He no longer needed to roar. He needed only to wait. For every breath of man carried within it two voices, the echo of the divine and the murmur of defiance. He need only fan the latter to make it flame. He moved through tribes like wind through tall grass, unseen yet everywhere. When they built altars, he stood beside them and whispered, "Build higher until the clouds hide your humility." When they prayed, he whispered, "Let others see how holy you are." When they gave, he whispered, "Take pride in your generosity." And the more they listened, the less they heard the one they were praying to. For that was his greatest weapon, not disbelief, but distraction. Not denial, but distortion. He learned that it is easier to twist truth than to erase it. The earth, once fragrant with remembrance, grew heavy with noise. Men began to call upon gods of their own making, gods of thunder, of harvest, of love and power. They carved their hopes into stone and bowed to what their hands had shaped. And Iblīs walked among their idols unseen, whispering softly, "See how beautiful your creation is." Yet for all his craft, the breath still moved. The divine wind that once filled Adam's lungs did not die with him. It passed on, generation to generation, a spark waiting to be remembered. And whenever that breath stirred, whenever a man or woman turned inward in silence, the fire of Iblīs shuddered. For breath remembers what dust forgets. Then from among mankind, Voices began to rise not from palaces but from caves, deserts, mountains, and solitude. Prophets, men chosen not for perfection but for patience. They came carrying words that cut through centuries of noise, reminding man of the breath within the dust. And every time they spoke, the covenant of shadows trembled. Iblīs could not bear their speech, for it was not merely language, it was command. Each verse was a spark of light that his fire could not consume. So he changed his tactic. He could not silence revelation, but he could surround it. He whispered to the proud, "You know better than the messenger." He whispered to the weak, "The path is too hard for you." He whispered to the scholars, "Your knowledge makes you safe." He whispered to the ascetic, "Your humility makes you great." And so the war between breath and dust continued, not in the skies but in the space between two heartbeats. Every prayer uttered was a battle cry. Every sin confessed was a victory against him. Every tear shed in secret was a wound upon his pride. And yet his patience endured. He had eternity, or something close to it. He did not need to win swiftly. He needed only to exhaust. He would make the world so full, so loud, so endless that silence itself would seem unbearable. For it is in silence that the soul hears its maker, and silence is the one thing Iblīs cannot enter. Sometimes he would rise again to the edges of heaven, not to plead but to listen. He would hear the angels' hymns, the same ones he once sang, and for a moment, just a moment, his flame softened. But memory for him was both light and torment. And before longing could awaken repentance, pride whispered again, "You are the test, not the tested." So he turned back toward the earth, where dust still forgot and breath still remembered. And he whispered into the hearts of men, not to make them his slaves, but his mirrors. He sought to make them repeat his story, to rise too high, to fall too far, to forget too completely. And yet, within that same plan lay his downfall. For man, unlike him, was made not only of choice, but of mercy. The clay that weighed him down was also what made him kneel. That kneeling, that act of surrender, was the one thing Iblīs could never do. And so it became the symbol of his defeat. Every prostration struck him like a star falling from the sky. Every whispered "forgive me" was a reminder that he had once refused the same word. And still he whispers. Still he waits. Still the war continues. But the end has already been written, that the breath shall outlast the dust, that light shall outshine the flame, and that even the whisper "why" Elyon one day falls silent. The war is not fought in the heavens, nor upon the fields of men. It unfolds in the unseen chambers of the soul. Every heart is its battlefield, every breath its soldier, every thought a blade. For the spirit that remembers longs to rise, but the dust from which it was formed pulls it back toward earth. Between them stands the whisper, the voice of the fallen flame, soft, patient, ancient. He does not shout. He does not command. He waits. He waits in the silence after a good deed, when pride quietly stirs and whispers, "You have done enough." He waits in the emptiness after a sin, when despair whispers, "You can never return." He waits in the pause before prayer, when doubt murmurs, "Will he even hear you?" That is how the war of breath and dust unfolds, not in noise but in stillness, not through swords but through suggestions. For man's heart is both throne and battlefield, capable of hosting light and darkness in the same breath. And every moment he must choose which to feed. Iblīs knew this truth better than any creature alive. He had studied humanity since their first dawn. He knew their hunger, their tenderness, their loneliness. He knew that mankind would chase what they loved and that he could only change what they loved. So he adorned the earth, weaving beauty around deceit. He made sin look like art and pride sound like wisdom. He turned worship into performance, charity into self-display, and longing into possession. He knew that if he could not make men evil, he could at least make them distracted. And distraction, he learned, is the slowest form of destruction. He walked through kingdoms that rose from the dust, watching their towers scrape the sky. He smiled as men called themselves divine, as they conquered and named lands after themselves, as they measured eternity in gold. Yet, even among those thrones of arrogance, there were always some who remembered. Old prophets whose hands trembled with the weight of revelation, mothers who whispered prayers over their sleeping children, wanderers who spoke to God beneath the stars. Each one a reminder that breath still remembered its source. He could not bear them. He would move closer, closer, until his fire was upon their hearts. He would whisper doubt into their dreams, fear into their faith, fatigue into their worship. Yet the more he tried, the more he found that the sincere are shielded by what cannot be seen. For when the heart truly surrenders, the whisper loses its sound. He once said in a voice no man could hear, speaking into the unseen air, "Why does he protect them when they are weak?" And the winds seem to answer, because they know they are weak. That was the secret Iblīs could never grasp. That humility, not power, guards the soul. That surrender is not loss, but return. That kneeling does not lower man, it raises him above his own dust. He had refused to kneel once, and in that refusal he sealed his exile. Now he watches every prostration, every tear of repentance, and it burns him more than any flame. For each bow is a memory of what he could not do. Each tear is a reflection of what he refused to feel. Yet he cannot stop watching. He cannot turn away. For though his heart is clothed in pride, it still remembers the light. And remembrance, even for the damned, is its own torment. Sometimes in the deep hours before dawn, when the veil between worlds thins, he stands at the edge of the unseen, near enough to hear the prayers rising like fragrance. He listens, silent, unmoving, as countless voices whisper the same name. He knows it. He once sang it. And in that knowing lies his sorrow, but pride holds him still. He tells himself, "I am not broken. I am what he made me." He tells himself, "I am the test, not the tested." He tells himself, "I do not envy them, I remind them." Yet even lies grow tired when repeated for eternity. And so he returns to the world of men, to their markets, their courts, their homes, their screens, their silence, to breathe once more into the spaces between their breaths, to whisper not evil but choice. For he knows, the Creator's mercy is vast, but man's attention is fragile. He need not destroy the soul, he need only distract it. And that is how he wages his war. Not through violence, but through noise. Not through destruction, but through forgetting. For when the breath forgets its source, the dust believes it can rise. Yet even so, the victory he seeks will never be his. Because the same breath that once defeated his flame still moves in every prayer, in every remembrance, in every heart that whispers, "Guide me." And the one who guides will always be greater than the one who whispers. There are wars that end in silence and wars that never end at all. This one began before time, and it will not cease until the last soul takes its final breath. It is fought not for land or blood, but for remembrance. For every human heart is a world, and within it eternity repeats the same battle between the call to rise and the weight that pulls it down. The angels see this war in every dawn. They descend when the hearts awaken for prayer, and they watch as the whisper stirs beside them. For even at the edge of light the shadow remains. But where the angels inspire, the whisper deceives, each competing for the same breath, each vying for the same space within the fragile chamber of man. Iblīs walks that narrow edge still, a watcher of souls, unseen yet present. He knows every shade of weakness, every doorway of pride. He knows that man is not fallen like him, but forgetful, that his war need not be waged in hatred, only in delay. If he can keep the soul from bowing long enough, the light begins to fade on its own. He has seen prophets rise and empires crumble, yet his vow remains unchanged. And though he was cast down in pride, he rules the world in patience. He knows that the greatest victory is not in destruction, but in distraction. He hides not in fire anymore, but in comfort. He hides in convenience, in certainty, in self-love. He no longer needs idols of stone. The human heart will craft its own. He no longer needs temples of arrogance. He builds them in screens and solitude, in minds that believe they are their own gods. And still, amid this ocean of noise, some hearts remain untouched, small lights flickering in the vast dark. He watches them too, curious, as if drawn by the very thing he despises. He listens to their prayers, their broken apologies, their soft whispers to the one he once loved. And in those moments, the fire within him trembles not from rage, but from recognition. For he knows that in their weakness, they hold what he lost, the humility that allows them to rise. There are tales told among the unseen that on certain nights, when the stars align and the heavens open in remembrance, Iblīs falls silent. He walks through the ruins of the world, his shadow brushing against the dust that once made man. He kneels not in repentance but in exhaustion. He places his hand upon the earth and whispers to it softly, "You were chosen and I was not." The earth does not answer, it only breathes. For the dust remembers what the fire forgets, that every fall can lead to return. And in that moment the heavens seem to sigh. For even rebellion has its sorrow. He rises again, the silence broken. His vow reignites. "By your might I will lead them astray." But his voice wavers now, for he knows that his victory is borrowed, that his rule is only until the trumpet sounds. He turns his gaze upward, toward the same throne that once bathed him in light. He cannot approach it, but he can still see it. And that sight, that unbearable brilliance, reminds him that even darkness owes its shape to light. And though he would never admit it, he knows that the day will come when both breath and dust will be gathered, when all souls will stand where he once stood before the voice that needs no sound. And on that day, the war will end not with victory or defeat, but with truth. The angels will stand in ranks like rivers of light. The prophets will rise like dawn after endless night. The children of Adam will bow, their hearts trembling with awe and fear. And Iblīs, the first to refuse, will be brought forth to witness what he denied. He will see the fire he once worshipped swallow itself. He will see mercy extended even in judgment. He will see that every whisper he ever spoke became a reason for another soul to seek refuge. He will understand, finally, that his rebellion was not the end of worship, but a part of it, that even his fall served the purpose he defied. And perhaps in that final instant before silence, when all things return to the source, he will glimpse what he once refused to see, that every command, every trial, every tear was a call to love, not to obey. And then, as all things bow, even the whisper will cease. The fire will fold into itself, and breath will outlast dust. The war will end where it began, beneath the throne, where light needs no name, and every soul, even the fallen, will finally understand. There is a silence more dangerous than sound, the silence of self-admiration. It echoes not in words, but in the heart that begins to see its reflection and call it truth. That silence was the beginning of the first fall. It is the mirror of pride. Long before the world knew sin, before the earth bore witness to rebellion, there was only adoration, endless, unbroken. The angels sang. The stars moved as praise. Every flicker of light bowed in unison before the unseen throne. And among them stood the one who glowed brightest. Iblīs, the servant of flame, the keeper of devotion, the voice that led the choirs of heaven. He had bowed 1,000 years without fatigue, his worship pure, his obedience flawless. He thought himself love itself, and in that thought the mirror began to form, invisible at first, as pride always is. A reflection so subtle it feels like gratitude. He looked upon his own worship, and instead of seeing the one he worshipped, he began to see himself. He told himself, "I am faithful, I am near, I am chosen." Each word true, each word deadly. For pride does not enter as evil. It enters as recognition without humility, as love that forgets its source. The angels continued their endless praise, but the fire within him began to hum with a new rhythm, a rhythm not of devotion, but of identity. He no longer bowed as a servant. He bowed as a lover who believed the beloved owed him recognition. The mirror gleamed brighter, unseen by all but the eternal. And then the command came that shattered the illusion. Bow before Adam. The light of the garden trembled. The newly formed human lay upon the dust, still, waiting for the breath of spirit. And when that breath entered him, When the clay opened its eyes and spoke the first word, the mirror within Iblīs cracked. For in that moment, he saw the truth his pride could not bear. That God's favor was not bound to form, nor flame, nor even faith. It was bound to humility, and humility had just been breathed into dust. The angels fell in reverence, but Iblīs, the fire that had never knelt to anything but light, stood motionless. He could not bow, not because he hated the command, but because he could not bear to see something lower loved as something higher. He looked upon the clay and saw imperfection. He looked upon himself and saw worth. He looked upon God and saw distance. That was the mirror's final reflection, not of worship but of self. When the Eternal spoke, "What has kept you from bowing to what I created with my hands?" The fire answered, "I am better than him. You made me from fire and him from clay." It was not just defiance. It was heartbreak turned inside out. For Iblīs could not understand a love that favored weakness. He had spent eternity perfecting strength. And in that blindness, he revealed what pride truly is. Not arrogance toward others, but confusion before mercy. He could not see how the beloved could love imperfection. He could not see that love, to be perfect, must stoop low. When the command of exile came, the mirror shattered completely. Its shards scattered across the unseen realms, embedding themselves into creation. And from those shards, the world inherited pride. Each time man looks into his reflection and forgets who breathed him into being, he gazes into one of those fragments. Each time he says, "I deserve," instead of, "I am grateful," a small echo of that ancient fire flickers again. And thus, the mirror of pride was passed down from flame to flesh, from Iblīs to Adam, from Adam to every son and daughter that followed. But what Iblīs could not foresee was that the same mirror that condemned him would teach humanity salvation. For when man looks into his pride and breaks it, when he sees his own reflection and turns away, the very act that damned the fire redeems the dust. And so the Eternal allowed the mirror to remain. It was not destroyed. It was sanctified by purpose. For how could humility exist if man were not given the chance to see his own arrogance? Even now, the mirror glimmers in hearts that rise, in hearts that fall. It waits quietly in moments of triumph, in victories whispered to oneself, in secret comparisons, in the subtle satisfaction of being right. And when it catches the soul's eye, it shows not the face of the divine, but the face of the one who believes he no longer needs him. That is how the war continues, not through violence, but through reflection. Not through denial, but through self-love disguised as faith. And Iblīs, master of that mirror, walks among mankind unseen, smiling faintly each time a heart forgets who truly deserves the bow. Pride was never born in fire alone. It is born in reflection. The moment a being looks inward and begins to measure its worth against another, the mirror forms. It begins as light, as awareness, as a desire to be seen by the one who sees all. But if the gaze lingers too long upon itself, the light bends. And in that bending, truth distorts. That was how Iblīs fell, not by hatred but by comparison, not by disbelief but by self-awareness without surrender. He had stood for ages in worship. He had bowed until the ground beneath him glowed with memory. The angels admired his constancy, his strength, his devotion. And perhaps even that admiration became the seed for praise when not returned to the one who deserves it becomes poison. The Eternal had never needed his worship. He had never asked for perfection, only submission. But Iblīs in his fire mistook effort for ownership. He believed his love for God gave him a place closer to the throne than others. And that was the first illusion the mirror gave him, that proximity means privilege. He did not yet know that nearness to the divine is not distance from others. It is humility among them. The H. A light rises, the softer its glow becomes. But Iblīs' light had hardened, it burned instead of illuminating. So when he looked upon Adam, a form still damp with the dew of creation, he did not see the breath of God. He saw dust. And in that dust he saw insult. He said within himself, All I have given, all I have done, and this is what you choose over me." He thought it was love that spoke, but it was love tainted by self. It was the kind of love that seeks recognition, not the kind that surrenders quietly in trust. The angels bowed, and in their bowing they disappeared. For humility is the act of vanishing into light. But Iblīs could not vanish, his fire demanded to be seen. And in that demand he became visible in the worst way possible, separate. The Eternal spoke, and his words were like rivers that divide truth from illusion. "What prevented you from bowing?" And he answered, still with reverence, still with eloquence, "I am better than him." He was not lying. Fire is finer than clay, faster, purer, more radiant. But truth without perspective becomes falsehood. For the worth of a thing lies not in its material, but in its maker. The angels trembled not because of his words, but because of what they revealed, that even light, when it looks away from its source, becomes shadow. When the decree of separation was spoken, the heavens did not rejoice, they wept. For a truth had been unveiled that no being had ever known, that love without humility leads not to closeness, but to exile. Iblīs fell not into darkness, but into his own reflection. He saw himself bright, alone, magnificent, and mistook that solitude for glory. He mistook God's silence for approval. He mistook his own echo for prayer. And thus the mirror of pride became his world. He could no longer see anything but himself. Even when he looked toward the throne, he saw only how far he had fallen. Even when he looked upon Adam, he saw only what he had lost. Even when he looked upon his own fire, he saw only memory. This is the curse of the proud, not that they are cast away, but that they carry their prison with them. Wherever they go, they see only themselves. And that same curse lingers within the children of Adam. For pride is not inherited through blood, it is inherited through reflection. When a man looks upon his deed and says, "I did this," without adding, "by his will," the mirror gleams once more. The proud pray, but they pray to be seen. They love, but they love to be praised. They give, but they give to feel worthy. Their goodness becomes a currency, and their devotion a display. And so the mirror grows larger, polished daily by self-satisfaction. Yet even pride serves a purpose in the design of mercy. For when the mirror breaks, and it always breaks, its shards become reminders. Every wound of humiliation, every fall from grace is a piece of the mirror shattering, and in those cracks light re-enters. That is why humiliation is sacred. It is not punishment, it is purification. It is the moment when the soul remembers it is dust, and dust remembers its maker. The prophets who walked nearest to the throne were also the most humble. They were tested, mocked, exiled, broken. Their greatness was not their power, but their refusal to gaze into the mirror. They knew that the closer one comes to light, the easier it is to mistake reflection for truth. So they turned their eyes away, always toward the source. And Iblīs, watching from the unseen, hated them not because they were chosen, but because they were content not to be seen. He could not understand the peace of those who vanish in obedience. He called it weakness, never realizing that it was freedom. Thus the mirror remains not to damn mankind, but to remind them, to show them what he could not learn, that to be seen by God one must first disappear. And so each soul is given a mirror, a reflection, a trial, a chance, to either polish it until it blinds them with pride or break it until it reveals the light beyond it. For humility is not the absence of greatness. It is greatness seen through the eyes of gratitude. The mirror still hangs invisible, yet everywhere. It is in the pause between a good deed and gratitude, in the space between worship and recognition, in the thought that asks not, "Does he see me?" but "Do they?" It does not gleam in palaces or temples alone. It lives in the quiet pride of the heart that believes it has understood enough, that believes it is safe, that believes it could never fall as the fire once did. That is the subtlest whisper of Iblīs. He no longer needs to call mankind to disbelief. He only needs to hand them the same mirror that deceived him. He walks through the earth unseen, not with fury but with fascination. For he has learned that men do not reject God, They simply replace him with themselves. He smiles when they pray only for what benefits them. He smiles when they give only when watched. He smiles when I speak of faith as ownership, as if light could ever belong to dust. And in his unseen kingdom he whispers to his legions of jinn, "You need not destroy them. You need only let them see themselves too clearly." Pride is the most beautiful of diseases. It wears the robe of virtue. It feeds on good deeds. It grows stronger with success. It convinces the heart that it is humble while quietly loving its own humility. That was the same seed that bloomed in him, the fire that wanted to be recognized for how brightly it burned. He could not understand that the greatest worship is not sound, but silence, not movement, but surrender. That true love of the divine does not seek to be seen. It disappears. When he refused to bow, he believed he was defending purity. He believed he was protecting the sanctity of worship. But worship without surrender is rebellion wearing the mask of devotion. And so he fell not because he was proud of sin, but because he was proud of worship. The angels, who knew humility as naturally as breath, looked upon him with sorrow. For they saw what few would ever see, that the most dangerous form of pride is the one that hides in the heart that believes it has none. It was this truth that the prophets carried back into the world. They warned their people not only of idols made of stone, but of idols made of self. They taught that even knowledge can blind, that even devotion can mislead, that even love without humility becomes a veil. When Moses stood before the mountain, he trembled not at the fire, but at the realization of how small he was. When Mohammed, peace be upon him, ascended near the throne, he said, "I cannot praise you as you deserve to be praised." Those words shattered the mirror of pride completely. For he who saw the light most clearly was the first to confess that he could not contain it. And the one who fell because of pride heard those words from afar and burned with envy, not because he hated the prophet, but because he envied the peace of one who had no need to prove himself to God. Iblīs still carries his mirror, and he offers it gently to every heart that rises. He does not whisper to the wicked alone. He comes to the pious, to the learned, to those who stand in the night while the world sleeps. He places the mirror before them and says, "See how different you are. See how far you've come. See how loved you must be." And if they believe it, even for a heartbeat, a crack appears within their prayer. For the moment they see themselves, they stop seeing him. This is why the saints weep when praised. It is not modesty, it is terror. They know how quickly light becomes reflection, how easily remembrance turns into reputation. They have seen what pride did to one made of pure fire, and they fear it could consume clay all the more swiftly. Yet even this danger holds a hidden mercy. For every time a soul stumbles in pride and remembers its error, it crushes the mirror a little more. Every humiliation, every failure, every heartbreak is the hand of the merciful shattering reflection, inviting the soul to see beyond itself once again. That is how the dust wins over the flame. It breaks easily, and in its breaking it returns to the source. The proud see breaking as defeat. The humble see it as completion. And that is why the fire fell while the dust rose. The angels still sing of this mystery, that the one who created both light and flame chose the one that could crumble, because it was in crumbling that remembrance would return. So when you feel your pride ache beneath your skin, when the thought of "I deserve" or "I am worthy" touches your heart, remember this. The whisper is not always outside. Sometimes it is your own reflection speaking back. The cure is not denial, it is surrender. Bow even when unseen. Thank even when forgot. Serve even when unpraised. And in that humility the mirror will lose its light and you will see through it at last. For behind every reflection the same truth waits, that there is only one worth looking at. And that is the secret the fallen flame never learned. In the beginning there was no choice. Only will divine, unbroken, unresisted. The stars moved because he commanded them. The angels sang because they could not do otherwise. The wind carried prayers before prayers even had names. But then the Eternal breathed into clay and something new entered creation: hesitation, the space between command and obedience, the pause where love could choose to bow or turn away. And in that sacred pause, choice was born. It was the most dangerous gift ever given. For in that moment, man was no longer mere echo, he became answer. And answers can differ. The angels, pure in light, did not understand it. The jinn, made of fire, already knew its weight. For they had been free long before man, and their freedom had already divided them into remembrance and rebellion. Among them, Iblīs had once stood as the finest of the remembery. But freedom without humility became his prison. When he fell, he did not fall alone. Choice fell with him. It scattered like ash across creation, entering every heart that would ever breathe. And from that day forward, every soul carried two chains, one forged from remembrance, the other from desire. The first leads upward, soft and unseen, pulling the soul gently toward its maker. The second winds downward, glowing with the heat of the self. And between them man walks, each step a verdict. Iblīs watches every step. He does not force the path, he only leans toward the weaker chain. He whispers when the heart is still, when the mind wanders, when the soul aches for ease. He knows that the greatest temptations are not toward sin, but toward delay. For every moment of later is a victory for him. Every postponed prayer, every withheld forgiveness, every ignored whisper of conscience, they are all small bows to the self, small refusals to the light. He has no power over will, only over hesitation. And hesitation is the door between obedience and fall. When he refused to bow, it was not rebellion alone, it was hesitation. He questioned before he obeyed. He reasoned before he surrendered. He chose the freedom to understand over the peace of submission. And that is how he chained himself to his own thought. For choice, when cut from faith, becomes its own prison. The children of Adam inherited that same freedom, and with it, the same danger. They can love or deny, build or destroy, bow or stand. Their choices carve the road of their souls, and every decision echoes beyond the world that sees it. The angel's record, the fire watches, and the one who breathed choice into clay waits with infinite patience, not for perfection but for return. For even the worst choice can lead back if followed by remembrance, and even the best deed can burn if followed by pride. The story of Iblīs was never about defiance alone. It was about the weight of free will. He was the first to stand at the crossroads between command and self, and he chose the self. Now, his mission is to make every human repeat that decision, to look inward instead of upward, to trust logic more than love, to worship the idea of freedom more than the truth of surrender. He does not tempt by shouting. He tempts by reasoning. He knows the language of justification. He knows that mankind, too, will cloak desire in poetry and call disobedience wisdom. And yet his power ends where gratitude begins. For gratitude is the chain that binds the soul to light. The one who says, "All I have is from you," has already broken every whisper. The one who bows willingly cannot be enslaved by pride, and the one who remembers cannot be deceived by reflection. The jinn of fire envy this truth, for man's choice, though it makes him stumble, also makes him capable of repentance, and repentance to them is a miracle. To fall and rise again is a mystery the fire can never know. Even Iblīs, in the secret corners of his silence, has wondered at this mercy. He has seen murderers forgiven, liars purified, idolaters washed clean in tears. And though he mocks them, a hidden ache trembles within him, for he knows that if he could only bow once, he too would be free. But pride, once hardened, cannot bend. It is a chain heavier than any made of iron. He forged it himself, link by link, with every whispered "I" that replaced you. So now he walks the world, offering that same chain to every soul he meets, not to bind them with hatred, but to make them forget the key. And the key is simple: remembrance. For the one who remembers cannot be ruled. The one who remembers sees the whisper for what it is: a shadow, not a voice. A test, not a truth. And in that seeing, the war of choice becomes peace again. Thus, man was given both freedom and the path to survive it. The whisperer, the watcher, the light, the breath, all are woven into his destiny. The question is not whether he will fall. He will. The question is whether he will rise again. For in the rising lies the victory of dust over fire. And that victory, once complete, will mark the end of choice, when all hearts return to the command they first heard. B. The gift of choice is a mercy disguised as danger. For to choose is to hold creation in your hands, to shape eternity with a single breath. It is the echo of the command that began all things. B. And yet, the same echo that gave birth to galaxies is the whisper that can lead a heart astray. The angels do not choose, they obey. The beasts do not choose, they survive. Only man stands between earth and sky, torn between instinct and intention, between hunger and holiness. He is the creature who must learn what both fire and light forgot. That freedom without surrender becomes exile. Iblīs learned this truth too late. For though he still believes himself free, his rebellion has become its own cage. He roams where he wills, but every step is chained to the vow he made. His words, "I will lead them astray," bind him more tightly than the angels' obedience binds them to the throne. His freedom became servitude to his own pride, and that is the nature of every false freedom. It ends where it begins, in the self. Man's war, therefore, is not against him. It is against the self that listens. The whisper only enters through the door the heart leaves open. Every temptation is permission. Every sin is not his victory, it is man's surrender of will to forgetfulness. For Iblīs cannot enter remembrance. He cannot speak in gratitude. He can only echo desire. He feeds on forgetfulness and dies in remembrance. That is why every prayer begins with the name, to remind the soul before it remembers anything else, to awaken it from the dream of control. For remembrance is not repetition. It is rebellion against pride. And yet, the path is not easy. For choice is not a single moment, it is an ocean of moments, endless and shifting. Man wakes each day in the midst of battle, carrying within him both clay and fire. The clay bows easily, but the fire remembers the rebellion. It whispers, "Why bow when you can rise?" It whispers, "Why serve when you can rule?" It whispers, "Why surrender when you can understand?" And the dust listens, trembling, for it too carries a fragment of that old flame. But then something older still speaks, the breath. The breath that came from the eternal, the wind that entered Adam's chest and declared, "He is mine." That breath does not argue, it calls. It says, "Return." And when the soul answers, the fire quiets. For remembrance is the only answer pride cannot refute. Reason can be debated, passion can be deceived, but gratitude silences every whisper. It is the simplest prayer and the most powerful. A single alhamdulillah weighs more than all the world's desires. Iblīs knows this. He knows that he is powerless against a thankful heart. So he wages his war not to destroy faith, but to starve it of gratitude. He turns blessings into burdens. He teaches the heart to count what it lacks, to measure love by what it receives, to see mercy as delay. He replaces wonder with comparison and joy with entitlement. He cannot steal the gift, so he makes you forget it was given. And thus the chain of choice tightens again. For every act of forgetfulness is a step toward his fire, and every act of gratitude is a step back to the throne. The path is not hidden, it is walked with words as simple as breath. When Adam fell to the earth, his first act was not despair, but remembrance. He said, "Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. If you do not forgive us and have mercy upon us, we will surely be among the lost." That prayer broke the first chain of pride. It turned exile into journey. It turned punishment into purpose. It taught the angels that mercy does not end at disobedience, it begins there. Iblīs heard that prayer too. He watched from afar, his fire trembling with something he did not recognize. It was not fear. It was not regret. It was the ache of knowing what could never be his. For repentance is not the act of asking, it is the act of kneeling. And kneeling for him had become impossible. He whispers still, but his whisper is weaker than it once was. For every time a soul remembers, his kingdom fades a little more. For every tear shed in secret, his fire cools. For every bow made in humility, his pride is reminded of its defeat. This is the unseen balance. His existence sustains humility, for without him, man might forget the need for grace. And man's remembrance sustains his torment, for every act of faith reminds him of what he lost. Thus both walk the same earth, one bound by pride, the other tested by it. One trapped in the illusion of freedom, the other freed by surrender. And so the chains of choice remain. Every heart is bound to both. Every step is a movement toward fire or light. And every breath, every quiet breath, is a chance to choose again. In the end, it will not be perfection that saves the soul, but the direction of its return. For the door of mercy was never locked. It only waits to be remembered. The night of humanity's first awakening was not bright with stars. It was dim, trembling, filled with silence and shame. Adam sat upon the earth, his hands stained with dust and tears, and for the first time creation saw what it meant to choose wrongly and to still be loved. The heavens did not mock his fall. The angels, who had once feared his potential for chaos, now gazed upon him with awe. For he did what none before him had done. He chose to return. That is the secret written into every soul, that the choice to fall is never final so long as one remembers the way home. The fire cannot do this. It burns forward, never back. It consumes, but it cannot kneel. And that is what separates flame from breath and exile from forgiveness. Iblīs, unseen, watched this scene unfold. He stood upon the ridge of the unseen, his wings now dusted with shadow, his flame flickering with something like grief. For though his hatred for Adam burned, there was still a trace, a faint memory of what it had once felt like to be close to the one who now turned from him. He whispered, not to deceive, but to question. Why was I denied what he was given? And the silence that answered him was the same silence that had once crowned him. It said nothing, for some truths can only be understood through surrender, but pride cannot surrender. Pride only questions, and so the chains that had bound him to his vow tightened once more. Man, however, was not cursed with such finality. His chains were not locked, they were keys disguised as burdens. The weight of choice was the path back to light. Every mistake became a door, every fall an invitation. Even sin itself, when followed by repentance, became a kind of worship, the worship of humility. This is what Iblīs could never grasp. He had mistaken purity for strength, when it was always the other way around. It is weakness that allows love to enter, and love that teaches the soul to bow. And so, though the fire fell with grandeur, it was the dust, fragile and formless, that learned how to rise. Every human life is a continuation of that first story, a long, slow unfolding of mercy within the prison of will. Each heart carries within it a throne and an altar. Upon the throne sits the self. Upon the altar waits surrender. And the two are always at war. Sometimes the self wins and the soul tastes the cold sweetness of pride. Other times the altar rises and the tears flow like rivers back to their source. Both are part of the same design, for even pride, when broken, leads to worship. And this is the wound that keeps Iblīs bound. He sees mankind err, yet be forgiven. He sees them defy, yet be loved. He sees them fall 1,000 times and still be called mine. And in that his fire burns with jealousy deeper than hatred. He calls to them still, through the silver of temptation, through the whisper of logic. He tells them that freedom is found in self-rule, that power is proof of favor, that pain is punishment, that mercy is weakness. He wraps lies in beauty and beauty in truth, until even those who seek God must pause to discern which voice speaks. But the wise know the difference. The voice of the merciful brings peace. The voice of pride brings urgency. For the divine calls with stillness, the whisper calls with noise. One invites, the other insists. And so the human heart becomes the battlefield once more, the war between peace and passion, between silence and sound. The angels mark every moment, The whisper watches every pause, and the Lord of both waits, not with wrath, but with infinite patience. For his plan was never to make creation flawless, but to make love possible through imperfection. When the final dawn rises, the chains of choice will dissolve. No will shall remain but his. Every whisper will fade into silence. Every act of remembrance will rise like light from dust. And Iblīs, who mistook freedom for eternity, will stand before the throne he once defied. He will see that all along, his rebellion was used to reveal the mercy he denied. That his whisper, meant to destroy, only deepened the gratitude of those who resisted him. That his fall, meant to separate him from God, only made others draw closer to him. And perhaps, as the heavens quiet for the final reckoning, he will look once more toward the light he once mirrored, and whisper not in defiance, but in awe, "Truly, you are the wise." And the fire that refused to bow will finally burn itself out in the shadow of its own pride. Then, at last, the war of choice will end, and only surrender will remain. There are realms that exist beyond the sight of men, kingdoms without sun or soil, woven not of matter but of essence. They lie between the folds of creation, where thought takes form and breath becomes shadow. It is there that the jinn dwell, the children of flame and wind, the hidden witnesses to man's story. Among them once stood Iblīs, their crown of brilliance, their teacher in devotion. But when he fell, his fall tore their world as well. For his pride did not only wound heaven, it poisoned fire itself. The kingdom of flame became the kingdom of smoke. Smoke is what remains of fire when it loses purpose. It drifts, directionless, searching for meaning in the air. And so too did the jinn wander, caught between obedience and rebellion, between worship and will. Some remembered the covenant. They bowed in silence, their flames cool with remembrance. They walked unseen through the world of men, guardians of messages, listeners at the edges of revelation. Others followed their fallen master, drawn not by loyalty but by resonance, for every fire recognizes its own kind. They became his shadows, his unseen legions, not demons as the world imagines, but whispers clothed in heat and hunger. Their kingdom is not a place but a presence, a realm layered over the world of man like breath upon glass. They live among us, moving through the spaces between sound and silence, unseen yet near. Their world burns beside ours, divided only by remembrance, and Iblīs reigns over it still, not as king but as echo, a voice that calls to them as he calls to us. He rules no throne, he rules through longing. For every jinn that remembers his light feels his loss. Every one that forgets repeats his fall. He teaches them what he teaches man, that to serve is to be less, that to bow is to diminish. He tells them, "You were made of flame, the firstborn element of creation. Why bow to clay?" And they listen, for flame always hungers for its own reflection. Yet even among his followers there is no peace, for pride cannot unite, it only isolates. Each flame burns for itself, each shadow whispers for its own glory. And so his kingdom flickers, vast but unstable, bound together by the same arrogance that destroyed him. From that unseen realm their whispers pass into ours. They slip through cracks in the heart, through anger, fear, desire. They whisper in crowds and louder still in solitude. They do not need worship, they only need attention. For what you listen to, you begin to become. But among them, there are those who repent, those who saw the light descend upon a mountain in Sinai, those who heard the recitation in the desert night and recognized in its rhythm the truth they had forgotten. They bowed unseen and their flames turned cool. For the word that burned in man's tongue was the same voice that once commanded the heavens. And Iblīs, watching from afar, felt his dominion weaken. For even fire can be guided when it remembers who lit it first. Still, his pride forbade surrender. He told his followers, "Let them worship, let them bow. I will claim those who pray without presence." And that became his newest art, to turn remembrance into ritual, devotion into habit, faith into noise. He would rather see 1,000 tongues move without heart than one heart move without sound. He knows the danger of sincerity. He knows it burns hotter than any flame he commands. The kingdom of smoke, for all its power, is fragile. It trembles each time a soul whispers, "In the name of God, the most merciful." For that name is the wind that clears smoke away. It leaves no place for pride to hide. It reveals that even the unseen cannot escape the unseen king. And so, the story continues between fire and dust, between smoke and breath, between memory and forgetting. The jinn walk beside us, some as allies, some as mirrors, and some as echoes of a fire still mourning its fall. Their world touches ours most deeply in silence, in the pause before temptation, in the space between anger and restraint. That is where the kingdoms overlap. That is where choice returns. And though Iblīs calls from within the smoke, his voice grows weaker with every act of remembrance. For every heart that turns toward light draws 1,000 unseen toward mercy. And even among the fireborn, some still whisper the prayer that breaks the chain. We hear and we obey. The kingdom of smoke will not last. For smoke is only fire longing to be purified. And when the final breath of the world passes, it will either cool into light or vanish forever into the void that gave it form. And then the fire will know what the dust always knew, that to surrender is to shine. There are nights when the unseen draws close, when the air itself feels alive, trembling, watchful, when the shadows seem to breathe, and a silence heavier than sound falls upon the world. Those are the hours when the kingdom of smoke stirs. It is not evil in form, but restless, a realm of beings created from the first fire, spirits bound by freedom, forever standing between remembrance and rebellion. They live where light bends, in the corners of prayer, in the breath between words, in the emptiness between worlds. Some are gentle, curious, almost human in their longing. They hover near the hearts that remember, listening to the recitation of truth, trembling at the mention of the Most High. Their flames soften into light. They become listeners of mercy, witnesses to human devotion. But others, those who followed the fallen flame, burn darker. Their fires smoke and coil, their voices like the hiss of wind through hollow caves. They carry the echo of Iblīs' vow, and in their whisper lives the same ancient hunger, not for destruction but for company. For every rebel seeks a reflection. Every exile craves another exile to share its silence. And so the dark jinn wander among the heedless, offering them companionship in loneliness, power in fear, pleasure in forgetfulness. They feed on absence, the absence of prayer, of remembrance, of awareness. And the more man forgets, the closer they draw. They build their cities where faith falters. They weave illusions over hearts that grow tired of seeking. They hide not in darkness but in distraction. They move in marketplaces, in empty rooms, in screens that glow long into the night. They whisper not of evil but of ease, for the world of smoke thrives where the spirit slumbers. Their leader, unseen, still commands them not with orders but with longing. He does not call them servants, he calls them kin. For all fire longs to return to its source, even when it burns against it. Yet there are among them those who have turned back, who have seen what arrogance does to flame and have chosen coolness over fury. They live close to light, protecting those who remember. Their whispers do not tempt, they warn. They are the unseen allies of those who walk in remembrance. It is said that when a human heart truly surrenders, a veil lifts in the unseen. The smoke parts, and for an instant the fire sees what it could have been, what it was made to be before pride changed its color. And in that moment the whole kingdom trembles, for even the shadows must bow before truth. Iblīs knows this. He fears not prophets or angels but sincerity, for one sincere heart can shake his entire dominion. He cannot bear the sound of a soul that repents, for repentance is fire turned back into light. He cannot enter a place where the name is spoken, for that name is the wind that disperses smoke. Still, he moves patient as time, waiting for the hearts that forget. He sends his followers to whisper not through words but through thoughts, through the ache of envy, the thrill of arrogance, the softness of justification. They need no language, they only need distraction. There are those who try to command them, men who seek to rule the unseen, to make pacts with the fire. They trade remembrance for power, humility for illusion. And though they believe they lead, they are the ones being led. For no one rules smoke, smoke only clings to what it consumes. The wise do not chase the unseen. They bow before it. They recite words older than fear. I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, from the evil of the whisperer who withdraws. And when those words are spoken, the kingdom shivers. The smoke recoils. The whispers fall silent. For remembrance burns hotter than any flame. It cleanses what fire cannot. It reminds both man and jinn alike that there is only one true kingdom, and it is not made of smoke, nor of clay, but of light. And when the day comes, when the veil between the worlds is torn, the kingdom of smoke will face its truth. The faithful among them will rise beside the righteous, their fire purified into brilliance. The rebellious will fall with their master, their flames collapsing into silence. And the unseen will no longer be unseen. The fire will bow to the dust will rise to the light, and the smoke will vanish like breath before the morning. There will come a night when the smoke begins to thin, when its veils of illusion waver before a single breath of truth, when the unseen trembles beneath the sound of remembrance, and every whisper that once hid in darkness finds itself exposed before the light it feared most. For all things born of pride must eventually face humility, even the fire, even the kingdom that thought itself unseen. It is said among the angels that when a servant whispers Allah, the unseen ripples like water touched by wind. The jinn who remember bow, the jinn who forget flee, for the name pierces smoke as dawn pierces mist, slowly, softly, inevitably. And on that day, the day not yet written in time but known in eternity, the kingdom of smoke will tremble before its creator. Every flame that once burned in rebellion will see what it denied, that even the shadows were part of his light. Iblīs will stand among them, not upon a throne, but upon the ashes of his own vow. His eyes, if fire can have eyes, will glow not with rage, but with the emptiness that comes after centuries of deceit. For though he once thought himself eternal, eternity belongs only to the one who wrote his name. He will look upon the fireborn, his followers, his kin, and see in them the reflection of his own tragedy. Pride mistaken for purpose, freedom mistaken for defiance, existence mistaken for control. And as the veil lifts between the worlds, even the jinn will weep. Those who believed in the unseen truth will rise radiant, their flames cool and white, their voices joining the hymns of the forgiven. Those who followed the whisper will fade like smoke, their rebellion consumed by the silence they once mocked. And Iblīs, the one who first said, I before you, will finally see what he could never bear to see. That mercy is not weakness, but the strength that outlasts fire. He will watch as the children of Adam, those fragile forms of dust, stand before the throne he once defied. He will see in their faces the reflection of what he refused, humility radiant like sunrise upon clay. And he will know, without needing to be told, that the dust has surpassed the flame. He will cry out then, not in repentance, but in realization. For regret without surrender is only grief. He will cry not for forgiveness, but for understanding. He will finally see that all his striving to prove himself greater only proved the greatness of the one who allowed it. The angels will watch in silence. The heavens will stand still. And the earth, the very dust he scorned, will bear witness against him. For every step mankind took toward God, every prostration, every tear, every whisper of forgive me, they were all born from the war he began. And thus his rebellion became the cradle of redemption. His fall became the lesson through which love was learned. Even then the Eternal will not speak in anger, for justice needs no fury when it is perfect. The command will be simple and the words will fall like light upon fire. Return to the fire you became. And he will return not dragged, not forced, but drawn by the weight of his own vow. For every oath made against the truth must end where it began, in the self. As he descends, the kingdom of smoke will follow. The rebellious jinn will fade with him, their illusions torn, their freedom revealed as bondage. The faithful among them will weep not in fear, but in gratitude, for even in their unseen exile, they were given the chance to choose. And when the last whisper dies, when the smoke dissolves into silence, creation will breathe again, pure, weightless, whole. The earth will remember the footsteps of prophets. The skies will remember the prayers of the forgotten. And between them, the breath of mankind, once tainted by pride, will rise like incense to the heavens. Then the unseen and the seen will unite. There will be no jinn nor men, no light nor shadow, only the one who made both. And perhaps in that endless silence where all things return, a spark will flicker once more, not of rebellion but of recognition, a whisper trembling faint from the heart of the fallen flame. You were always greater than I believed. And then the smoke will be no more, only light, infinite, unbroken, eternal. There will come a dawn unlike any other, a dawn not born of sun or stars, but of reckoning, the light that rises when all other lights are spent. The heavens will not open with thunder this time. They will open in silence, for silence is the sound of truth when all lies have burned away. The angels will stand in ranks beyond counting, their wings folded in awe, their eyes reflecting the light of the throne. They have waited since before time, guarding every prayer, recording every breath. And now the record is full. The earth will tremble not in fear but in recognition, for it too has waited. It has felt every footstep, carried every burden, hidden every secret beneath its soil. Now it will speak, and its voice will be the sound of memory itself. And the sky will unfurl like parchment, revealing what was written before all beginnings, the story of obedience and fall, of mercy and return. Every whisper will find its echo, every shadow will be shown its source. And the breath that began creation will call it all back to its author. The fire will gather, the dust will rise. And between them, the breath, that holy spark of divine remembrance, will stand to witness what the ages could never contain. Then will come the sound that ends all sounds, a trumpet, not of brass or wind, but of command. Its note will roll through every world, shattering illusion, awakening the sleepers of centuries. The mountains will crumble like parchment dust. The seas will spill into the void. The stars will fall from their stations, each one bowing before the one who first hung them in place. And in that moment, every soul will know what it means to be seen. From every realm, light and smoke, clay and flame, they will come. Prophets and tyrants, saints and sinners, angels and jinn. All creation will stand where Iblīs once stood, before the throne that needs no sun to shine. The air itself will tremble with names, each soul called forth not by title but by truth. Some will come radiant, their hearts shining with the light of remembrance. Others will come heavy, dragged by the weight of their own forgetfulness. And there, in the midst of that gathering, the fallen flame will appear, not in glory but in exposure. His fire will burn pale, a ghost of what it once was, for no light can rival the light that reveals it. He will raise his gaze, and for the first time since his fall, he will look fully upon the one he defied. No veil will stand between them. No distance will shield his pride. And though his heart has known no fear, he will tremble now not at punishment, but at the unbearable beauty of the truth. He will see that the mercy he once mocked has wrapped all things, that even his own rebellion was a thread in the tapestry of divine wisdom. He will see that his whispers led men not to ruin, but to redeem. Tion, that his defiance revealed humility, that his envy unveiled love. And perhaps in that instant before judgment, he will understand the verse he once ignored. My mercy encompasses all things. But understanding without surrender is only sorrow, and sorrow, when eternal, becomes fire. The throne will not need to speak in wrath. The truth itself will separate light from shadow. Every being will move toward what it resembles, light to light, darkness to its own echo. The angels will sing again, not of praise alone, but of completion. Their voices will rise like rivers returning to their sea. and every note will say the same thing: it is finished. The dust will bow and the fire will bend. The jinn who believed will shine like morning, and those who followed Iblīs will vanish into their own smoke. And the breath, the first breath that entered Adam, the same that carries every prayer, will rise. It will return to the one who gave it, carrying with it all the sighs, tears, and whispers that ever crossed a human heart. And the voice of the Eternal will speak, not in sound but in stillness. To whom belongs the kingdom this day? And creation will answer from every realm, from every atom of being, to you, the one, the subduer. Then the veil of existence will lift. There will be no fire, no dust, no seen, no unseen, only light without beginning, without end. And that will be the last dawn, not the end of heaven, but the beginning of what no heart has imagined. The story will close not with victory or loss, but with return. For even the fallen served a purpose, even the exile was a path home. And the voice that once said be will speak again, not to command but to embrace. Everything will bow, everything will rest. And the light that once whispered creation into being will whisper once more, you are forgiven. When the trumpet's echo fades, there will be a stillness beyond sound, a silence that even angels dare not break. It will be the silence of recognition, when every soul realizes that the story has always been about returning. The mountains will have crumbled into dust, the seas will have boiled into vapor, and the stars, those ancient witnesses of prayer, will have dissolved into the light they once reflected. Nothing will remain but awareness, and the awareness will have only one direction: upward. The throne will not move. It was never distant. It will unfold like a secret long kept, its brilliance spilling across existence until even the shadows remember they were once light. And then, from among the gathered, a sound will rise, not a voice, but the weeping of recognition. For those who had believed yet forgotten, those who had fallen yet hoped, will see before them the face of the mercy they once doubted. Every tear shed in secret, every sigh uttered in repentance, every heartbeat that trembled with longing, they will appear now as jewels scattered across the plain of judgment. And the Eternal will say, "This is what you sent forth, and I kept it for you." The angels will move through the assembly like rivers of light. They will carry no scales, for every measure will already be known. They will not question, for nothing is hidden from the one who wrote all things. They will only bear witness to the prostrations in the dark, to the mercy between men, to the moments of truth that no one else saw. And then, from the farthest edge of creation, a sound unlike any other will be heard, a slow, trembling cry that seems to come from the fabric of existence itself. It will be the voice of the one who first defied. Iblīs will stand before the throne. No crown, no wings, no glory, only the remnants of the fire that once shone like devotion. He will look upon the dust he scorned and see it standing higher than himself. He will see those he deceived clothed in forgiveness, those he envied now radiant in peace. And he will understand at last that even his rebellion served the one he rebelled against. For the story was never his to control. It was mercy that allowed him to whisper, mercy that allowed him to fall, mercy that allowed his fire to test the clay so that love could prove itself stronger than pride. He will speak then, for the final time. Not in arrogance, but in surrender's shadow. "My Lord, your decree was true." The words will fall heavy, not as confession, but as realization, the first truth he ever uttered without pride. The angels will not rejoice at his downfall. They will lower their wings in grief, for even judgment will feel like sorrow when it meets the one who once sang beside them. But justice will not weep, for it is not cruelty, it is completion. And the Eternal will speak to him, not in anger, but in the calm of inevitability. You were given time, and you used it as written. You were a test for those who remembered me, and in their remembrance you have been defeated. And Iblīs will bow his head not in worship, but in exhaustion, for eternity in. Defiance weighs heavier than eternity in flame. He will turn, and the fire will open to receive him. But as he descends, he will not curse the light. He will whisper instead, not to be heard but to be freed. Had I bowed once, would you have forgiven me? And though no answer will come, the silence will say everything. For mercy was never withheld, it was refused. The faithful jinn, those who chose light over pride, will bow as he passes, not in reverence but in awe of justice fulfilled. They will remember his strength, his beauty, his fall, and they will weep. For even among the fireborn, no one was ever loved as he once was. The angels will close their ranks, their voices rising like wind through eternity. They will sing not of victory but of truth, that all things return to their Maker, that every breath ends where it began. And mankind, the clay that once trembled before fire, will be gathered in light. They will stand in rows, their faces calm, their eyes reflecting dawn. They will no longer carry the weight of choice, for choice will have done its work. They will no longer fight the whisper, for the whisper will have fallen silent. The Eternal will address them not as judge, but as the one who remembers every heartbeat. You were my secret breathed into dust. You were my witnesses among creation. You forgot me, yet I remembered you. Enter now into peace. And the gates will open not as walls, but as light spreading without end. It will flow like mercy reborn, like the first morning of creation made eternal. And the dust, once bound to the earth, will rise weightless, luminous, freed from its heaviness forever. The angels will welcome them home, their wings whispering through the air like falling rain. Then all will look once more to the throne, and the light will speak its final word, a word without sound, a word that began all beginnings. Be. And creation will become again, not in repetition but in return. The story will not end. It will unfold anew, forever within the embrace of the one who never began and who will never end. When the last name is called, when the last soul stands before its Maker, and when even time itself bends its head in surrender, there will be no more veils, no more shadows, no more questions, only truth, unveiled, unchanging, infinite. The light of the throne will pour across existence, filling every crevice that ever knew darkness. The mountains, now dust, will shimmer as though remembering their Creator. The oceans, once deep with secrets, will lie still like mirrors. Every atom that ever existed will hum with one remembrance that all of this was never chaos but choreography. The fire will be stilled. The breath will return. The dust will shine like stars. Creation, for the first time, will be silent and unafraid. And then in that stillness the Eternal will speak again, not in thunder, but in a whisper that will be heard across all hearts at once. To whom belongs the kingdom now? There will be no answer but one. From every soul, from every light, from every tear of every being, the response will rise like the dawn itself. To you, the one, the subduer. It will not be fear that fills creation, but awe, for the truth will no longer need to be believed. It will be seen. The very air will taste of it. The very light will breathe it. And all that was once hidden, every secret, every pain, every unanswered prayer, will reveal its purpose like stars revealed at night. Then in that ocean of knowing, the Eternal will unfold mercy one last time. It will move not like fire, but like wind, soft, embracing, complete. It will touch every soul that ever longed for home. Even those who walked farthest from the path will see, for a moment, how close the path had always been. The angels will weep not for sorrow, but for the beauty of completion. They have watched since the first breath, since the command that made dust alive. They have seen pride and patience, sin and surrender, and now they will see what all of it was for. For mercy will cover what judgment could not. Every deed will find its meaning in the one who measured it. Every wound will reveal the love that allowed it to heal. Every silence will echo with the name that never ceased to listen. And there, amidst the endless ranks of the forgiven, the redeemed, and the restored, the story of the first fall will finally rest. The rebellion that began with "I am better" will end with "You are greater." For even the fire will bow and even the dust will sing. The light of paradise will rise then, not as a place, but as a state of being. There will be no sun, for the throne itself will illuminate everything. There will be no nights, for rest will no longer be needed. There will be no time, for love will have no end. The faithful will walk among gardens unseen by mortal eyes, their feet weightless, their hearts full of what they once prayed for, and far beyond what they could ever have imagined. The rivers will not be of water, but of remembrance flowing endlessly, reflecting the light of his smile. They will look to one another and find no envy, no distance, no regret. They will know without words that they have always belonged here, not because of what they earned, but because of who he is. And when they lift their gaze, they will see not walls or gates, but the face they once sought in faith. No description will capture it, no memory will contain it. It will not be a face of form, but of knowing, a beauty that can only be felt, a nearness that can only be breathed. And the Eternal will say to them, I am pleased with you. You will never suffer again. At those words, all sorrow will dissolve, not forgotten, but transformed into gratitude. For even pain will be seen as mercy in disguise. Even waiting will be known as love delayed. Even loss will be revealed as preparation for reunion. And for the first time since creation began, there will be laughter without end. Not laughter born of pleasure, but of relief, the relief of returning home. Meanwhile, beyond that horizon of peace, where mercy has completed its circle, a single shadow will remain, the echo of a fire long extinguished. It will not cry out again. It will not rise again. It will simply fade into the silence of the one who encompasses all beginnings and all endings. For even that shadow will be used as proof that pride cannot outlast mercy, that defiance cannot outlive love, that every story, no matter how dark, exists only to glorify the light that outshines it. And as the eternal dawn rises, the dawn not of day, but of peace, the voice that began all creation will speak one final time. All that was hidden has returned. All that was lost is found. All that was divided is whole. And there will be no more words, for no words will be needed. Every soul will understand. Every heart will rest. And the breath that once carried prayer will now carry praise forever. The story of rebellion, mercy, and return will close its final page, not with ending, but with eternity. And the last light of heaven will not fade. It will spread beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond time, until there is nothing left to know but him. And if the silence never broke, would your faith still rise in the dark? If the fire never returned, would you still kneel in the ashes? What if the last word God spoke to you was goodbye? The story is over now. The fire has quieted. The stars have heard what they were waiting to hear, that even the fallen were written in mercy. The angels have folded their wings. The dust has laid itself back upon the earth. And somewhere in the deep silence between two heartbeats, the echo of the first command still lingers, soft, eternal, unending. Be. You have heard the rise of pride, the ache of exile, the long shadow that walked beside mankind. You have walked through smoke, through mirrors, through the weight of choice itself. And now there is only stillness. If you are still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Perhaps something ancient in you remembered what the world has tried to make you forget, that you are made of breath, not dust alone, and that every fall is just another way home. So close your eyes. Let the noise of the world fade behind you. The war is not yours tonight. The whispers have no power here. There is only peace now, the kind that existed before the first dawn. The kind that waits beyond the last one. Rest in it. Breathe as Adam once breathed. And remember, even the flame that fell could never escape the one who lit it. Sleep now in light. Sleep beneath the mercy that outlasts fire. Sleep in the remembrance of the one who never forgets. The story ends where it began, in silence and in love. Elyon Sacred Sleep Series.